Chapter 644. Not only him but Li Qianxue was also surprised. Standing at the side, he couldn't react for a moment. "Qingsang, are you going to give birth?" Hua Jinyao, who was dumbfounded, asked again. Su Qingsang couldn't answer his question. She grabbed his arm tightly and said, "Quick, take me to the hospital." Hua Jinyao said those words through gritted teeth, as if he had finally come to his senses. "Hospital? Yes, the hospital. Quick, I'll carry you to the hospital." He couldn't care less about Li Qianxue, who was standing by the side. He picked up Su Qingsang and walked towards the parking lot. Li Qianxue wanted to stop them, but she slapped her forehead and quickly went back into the house to tell the Hua and Li families the news. Hua Jinyao almost wanted to fly to the hospital, but it had snowed the day before. No matter how hard he tried, he had to consider the road conditions. Unable to increase his speed, he became more and more nervous, especially when he saw Su Qingsang's pale face. "What do you think? Qingsang, are you in pain? Bear with it. It won't take long." Although it was said to be fast, it was impossible to drive fast on this snowy road. Su Qingsang only had a stomachache. She knew that she was still far from being able to live. Seeing Hua Jinyao's pale face, she still tried to comfort him. "Hua Jinyao, you forgot one thing." "What?" "You didn't bring the delivery bag." The delivery kit had been prepared at home, but Hua Jinyao had only been focused on taking her to the hospital and hadn't brought it with him. "Then what should we do?" Hua Jinyao didn't even dare to slam on the brakes and slowed down the car. His face was full of anxiety. "What should we do?" "Don't be so nervous. Don't worry, my mom will bring it over. Now you just have to concentrate on driving." "Drive, yes, drive." Hua Jinyao focused on driving again, but he couldn't help it. From time to time he would turn his face to look at Su Qingsang. Su Qingsang's stomach hurt. In order to distract herself, she took out her phone and called Sun Huiya. She told her that she might be in labor. He was relieved when he got Sun Huiya's confirmation that she would rush to the hospital immediately. He hung up the phone and looked out of the car window. It snowed in Rong City, and the whole city was covered in silver, like a fairy tale world. The pain in her abdomen began to intensify. She adjusted her breathing and tried to calm herself down. Hua Jinyao rushed to the hospital as soon as possible. Hua Jinyao often came to the first hospital, and so did the obstetrics and gynecology department. But he had never been so anxious and flustered in this place before. He ran all the way with Su Qingsang in his arms. Sun Huiya lived close to the hospital, so she had already arrived. In addition to Sun Huiya, there were also Deputy Chief Shen Lingyun, Yang Lu, Ling Fei, Li Ting, and some experienced doctors. Su Qingsang was pregnant with twins. If possible, she wanted to give birth naturally. However, they had to examine Su Qingsang first. Sun Huiya arranged for Su Qingsang to do some basic checkups, and Hua Jinyao accompanied her the whole time. After the examination, Sun Huiya and Su Qingsang looked at the various data together. "Qingsang, you're doing well. Try to have a natural birth." "Okay." Su Qingsang was a doctor herself, so she didn't need Sun Huiya to say anything. She cooperated with her the whole time. Soon the rest of the Hua family arrived. Old Master Hua Mingguang and his wife, and the Li family. Li Qianxue looked at Su Qingsang, her eyes full of worry. "Qingsang? How are you? Would it work? Why don't we cut it open?" Li Qianxue didn't care about anything else. She only wanted her daughter to be fine. "Mom." Su Qingsang was actually really in pain, but Li Qianxue's concern made her feel warm and a little helpless. "Dr. Sun said that the situation is very good. I can give birth on my own. Don't try to persuade me." "But, Mom, don't worry. I'm a doctor myself. I know what's best. I won't joke around with my body. Then, I want to go in with you." "Mom, don't accompany me. Grandpa is still here." "Don't you want to accompany Grandpa?" "Don't worry, Director Sun and Director Shin are very experienced. They have also delivered many twins. There's no problem at all. Don't worry." No matter how worried Li Qianxue was, she could only choose to believe Su Qingsang. Su Qingsang planned to go into the delivery room. She had been there many times. Every time she gave birth to someone else's child. This was the first time she went in to give birth herself. "Qingsang." Hua Jinyao went forward and held her hand. "Qingsang, how are you? Does it still hurt? Can you give birth on your own? Is there a problem? Will it be dangerous? I often see on TV that it's difficult to give birth. Why don't you listen to your mother and have a C-section? Are you scared?" Su Qingsang's question was a joke. It was the first time she had seen Hua Jinyao so incoherent and nervous. She was joking, but Hua Jinyao nodded very seriously. "Yes, I'm so scared. Su Qingsang was stunned for a moment. Hua Jinyao held her hand tightly. I'm really scared. Qingsang, you'll be fine, right? Of course. It was the first time Su Qingsang had seen Hua Jinyao so panicked. Her stomach was hurting, but because of his reaction, she felt that the pain wasn't as intense as before. Director's son is here. Don't worry. Everything will be fine. Su Qingsang looked at Hua Jinyao's state. She had originally wanted him to accompany her into the delivery room, but looking at him now, she gave up. Just wait outside. No. Hua Jinyao was very determined. I want to go in with you. Are you sure? Su Qingsang was quite calm. Actually, you don't need to go in with me. Be it Chief Sun or Chief Shin, they were both very experienced doctors. With them here, I'll definitely be fine. I want to go in with you. Hua Jinyao was very persistent. Su Qingsang nodded. Okay. Then don't cause any trouble later. I promise I won't. Hua Jinyao raised 3 fingers and promised. However, when he really entered the delivery room, Hua Jinyao realized that his promise seemed to have been made too early. Su Qingsang was very calm. This calmness was even calmer than when she was on the operating table. She slept on the delivery bed and listened to Sun Huiya's instructions. Later, when I tell you to use force, you can use force. Okay. Su Qingsang was in so much pain that her face turned pale. However, Hua Jinyao's face was even paler than hers. Honey, if you're in pain, you can bite my hand. Hua Jinyao grabbed her hand very tightly. It was obvious that he was very nervous. In contrast to his nervousness, Su Qingsang was calm. Why would I bite your hand for no reason? Aren't you in pain? I can bear it. Don't bear it. You'd better bite me. Su Qingsang took a deep breath. Hua Jinyao, calm down. Don't forget that I'm a doctor. Oh. Hua Jinyao watched as her face became paler and paler, her breathing became heavier, and the sweat on her forehead increased. Honey, are you really not going to bite me? Sun Huiya had already started to prepare for the delivery. Seeing Hua Jinyao like this, she inexplicably wanted to laugh. She held back. Shut up. Su Qingsang glared at him. Don't speak. Qingsang, you can start using force now. Su Qingsang began to use force. She didn't scream like an ordinary pregnant woman. That wouldn't help, and it would also cause her to lose strength. When Sun Huiya told her to use force, she used force. When she told her to relax, she relaxed. Very good, that's it. Come, take a deep breath and use force. Su Qingsang was using force, but she felt that Hua Jinyao's breathing was getting heavier and heavier. Sweetheart. Hua Jinyao had never felt so weak in his 31 years of life as he did today. He held Su Qingsang's hand tightly. Why isn't the child out yet? Su Qingsang didn't have the time to talk to him. She finally realized that letting Hua Jinyao in was a mistake. I can already see the head. Qingsang, don't be distracted. Use force. Hua Jinyao became more and more nervous. Su Qingsang could even feel that her wrist was about to turn red from his pinching. She was in great pain. Not only did it hurt below, but it also hurt above. Hua Jinyao, let go of me. She gritted her teeth and said, but her voice was too soft. Hua Jinyao didn't hear her at all. His attention was completely attracted by Sun Huiya's words. Qingsang, did you hear that? The child is coming out? Su Qingsang didn't want to talk to him anymore. She wanted to break free from his hand and use force. She felt something coming out of her body. It's coming out, it's coming out. It's a boy. Congratulations. Sun Huiya carried the child out, and Hua Jinyao's grip tightened. Qingsang, did you hear that? It's coming out, it's coming out. Su Qingsang didn't want to talk to him anymore. She had ears. She could hear it herself. What? She heard the sound of the child crying. However, she didn't have time to relax. Her stomach hurt even more. She had been in pain for too long, so long that she couldn't hold on any longer. Sun Huiya's expression was solemn. She placed her hand on Su Qingsang's stomach and looked at Su Qingsang's pale and exhausted face. Qingsang, you can't relax. There's another one in your stomach. Hua Jinyao's happiness didn't last for more than 10 seconds. Sun Huiya's words made him nervous. There's another one? Yes. Sun Huiya had also delivered twins before. She had a lot of experience. Qingsang, you should rest for a while. Take a rest first. We'll start exerting ourselves later to give birth to the other child. Okay. Su Qingsang was weak. She had already exhausted most of her strength just now. Now she really didn't have any strength. Ling Fei took the warm water that she had prepared early in the morning and gave it to Su Qingsang. She took 2 sips and closed her eyes to rest. Qingsang, you can't fall asleep. Sun Huiya was afraid that she would fall asleep. Wait a minute. I'll help you check the condition of the other child now. Su Qingsang couldn't say anything. She could only nod weakly. Hua Jinyao looked at her current state and felt extremely sorry for her. He held Su Qingsang's hand tightly. He had no intention of looking at the child that had just been born. Qingsang, listen to me. The position inside isn't very good right now, but don't be nervous. Let's work hard together. Su Qingsang had no strength left. She looked at Sun Huiya and nodded silently. Sun Huiya's expression was solemn. Giving birth to twins naturally was a relatively difficult thing. It required both children to be in a normal position with their heads down. But now that one child was out, the other child's arm was exposed first. She and Shun Lingyun looked at each other and saw the solemn look in each other's eyes. Su Qingsang really didn't have any strength left. The pain in her stomach was even worse than before. It was as if a knife was constantly stabbing her abdomen, and the pain even made large drops of sweat fall from her forehead. Sun Huiya placed her hand on her abdomen, trying to artificially adjust the position of the fetus. Su Qingsang was in so much pain that her body twitched. Hua Jinyao felt that he was about to faint. He couldn't care about the child at all. All his attention was on Su Qingsang. Qingsang? Qingsang, how are you? Are you okay? Su Qingsang couldn't respond to him. She was in so much pain that she didn't have any strength at all. Director Sunday, child, can you turn around? He gritted his teeth and asked these two questions. Then he met Sun Huiya's solemn face. I'm trying to help you adjust the position of the fetus. Don't be nervous. You're also a doctor. You know that this is normal. Su Qingsang had checked the information before. If some twins had a natural birth, it would take a long time before they could be born. In the past, almost none of the twins that she had delivered had a natural birth. They were all delivered by cesarean section. Since she had planned to have a natural birth, it wouldn't be as easy as a cesarean section. She closed her eyes to rest. She was extremely sleepy, in pain and tired. She almost couldn't hold on any longer. When she was a doctor, she knew that pregnancy and childbirth were very difficult, but she didn't expect it to be so difficult. Qingsang, wake up. Don't sleep. She heard Sun Huiya's voice in a daze. Not only him, but Hua Jinyao's voice was also heard. She wanted to open her eyes, but it was very difficult. She couldn't open her eyes at all. Her body hurt so much that she didn't even have the strength to open her eyes. Qingsang, wake up. The child is coming out. You have to cooperate with me. Qingsang? Qingsang, she heard people calling her, but she couldn't open her eyes. She was so tired, as if she had lost all her strength. At this moment, Su Qingsang was no longer the calm and rational doctor. She knew that there was another one in her stomach, but she was too tired and had no strength. Qingsang? Qingsang. Hua Jinyao looked at the pale and powerless Su Qingsang. He realized that he couldn't wake her up no matter how hard he tried. He was terrified and looked at Sun Huiya. What should we do? Dr. Sun? Qingsang can't wake up now. Why don't we perform a C-section on her? We can't do it now. Sun Huiya's expression was more serious than before. The child's head has already fallen down and is stuck at the entrance of the uterus. At this time, we can only wake her up and let her give birth to the child by herself. Qingsang, did you hear that? Qingsang, wake up quickly. Hua Jinyao had never been as panicked as he was at this moment in his life. He was panicking and at a loss. He didn't know what to do. He held Su Qingsang's hand tightly and kept kissing her sweaty cheek. Qingsang, wake up. We still have a baby. Don't sleep. Try harder. Don't sleep, okay? Su Qingsang couldn't hear it, or perhaps she could, but she couldn't wake up. She just felt tired. She felt very tired, very tired. She didn't have any strength, let alone giving birth. Qingsang? Qingsang? Sun Huiya's expression was rather ugly. She reached out to pinch Su Qingsang's philtrum. Qingsang, wake up. Try harder. Wake up. Just once. Wake up. Su Qingsang felt noisy and tired. Some things didn't matter to her, but when it really happened to her, it was often a doctor who didn't treat himself. In fact, her previous performance was already quite good, but she was pregnant with twins. Qingsang? Hua Jinyao called her a few times, but he couldn't wake Su Qingsang up. His heart became more and more flustered. He held her hand, bent down and placed her hand on his face. He leaned down and looked at Su Qingsang, who had her eyes tightly closed and was exhausted. Qingsang, I beg you, wake up. Listen to me. There's something I've never told you. Don't you want to know what it is? Su Qingsang heard it, but she was really too tired and in too much pain. She didn't have the strength. Qingsang. Hua Jinyao kissed her cheek a little hard. He wasn't even afraid of hurting her. He wanted her to wake up. Qingsang, I love you. He kissed her forehead, her eyelids, the tip of her nose and her lips. Looking at Su Qingsang who didn't react, Hu Jinyao felt his eyes start to sting and swell. Qingsang, did you hear that? I love you. I really, really love you. He didn't see Su Qingsang's brows move slightly. He just pressed his face against her cheek. Do you still remember the first time we met? It was also in the hospital. You stood in the hospital corridor and said that the wedding was cancelled in such an imposing manner. At that time I thought that this woman was really decisive and strong. You proposed to me, and you asked me if I wanted to marry you? You didn't see the look in your eyes at that time. There was a hint of nervousness in her anticipation. She was afraid of being rejected, afraid of losing face especially in front of such a scumbag. Hu Jinyao looked at her stubborn but unable to hide the trace of vulnerability in her eyes, and his heart skipped a beat. He generously agreed to her request. He agreed to marry her. At that time he thought, so what? Wasn't it just marriage? Anyway, Grandpa had wanted him to get married for a long time. This woman with such a personality, Grandpa should like her, right? Married life was much better than he had imagined. Su Qingsang's personality looked a little cold on the surface, but her heart was as warm as fire. Her coldness was protective, and she only used it on people she was not familiar with. Her background, her personality, and everything about her. After slowly understanding her, Hu Jinyao found that there was a shadow of Su Qingsang in his heart and eyes. Because of the accident in his childhood, there seemed to be nothing wrong with him on the surface, but only he knew that there was a wall in his heart. Not just anyone could enter the heart of an impenetrable fortress. However, Su Qingsang was able to push down his wall bit by bit and stubbornly moved in. Qingsang, I love you. Do you hear that? Wake up quickly. Okay. He had never tried to cry for anyone other than his family in his life. The few times he was touched were all for Su Qingsang. Now Hu Jinyao's eyes were full of tears. He enjoyed his married life with Su Qingsang. He liked to see her every day after work. He liked the warmth in the house because of her existence. He liked to have her by his side even if she didn't do anything. Without Su Qingsang, he couldn't imagine how he would live such a long life in the future. Qingsang, I'm begging you. Wake up. I promise you that as long as you wake up, I'll listen to you in the future. Qingsang, he felt his face itch and instinctively stepped back. He looked at Su Qingsang's face. She was still weak and pale, but her eyes were open. You are so noisy. After saying these 3 words, she looked at Sun Huiya. Director Sun, the child is coming out. You have to work harder. Sun Huiya's face was full of joy when she saw that she was awake. Although the situation just now wasn't dangerous for adults, it was easy for children to suffocate if they were stuck inside for too long. Come, Qingsang, listen to me and cooperate with me. When I tell you to work hard, you start working hard. Just once, let's try to succeed once and give birth to the child. Su Qingsang nodded weakly. 1, 2, 3, use more strength. Su Qingsang really didn't have any strength left. Amidst the pain and exhaustion, she saw Hu Jinyao's face that was as pale as a sheet of paper. She suddenly raised her hand and gently stroked his hand. Hu Jinyao grabbed her hand and pressed it tightly against his face. Hu Jinyao. Su Qingsang squeezed out those words with all her strength. I love you too. After saying this, she used all her strength. This time, the feeling of relaxation really came. Something left her body. She heard Sun Huiya's voice. I've given birth. This is a daughter. Qingsang, you've given birth to a pair of twins. Su Qingsang curled her lips. She wanted to smile, but she couldn't smile now. All her perseverance had been used up in that instant. Su Qingsang, who had relaxed, fainted completely. Before she fainted, she only heard Hu Jinyao's extremely sharp and panicked cry. Qingsang. Qingsang. The people who came to visit her in the ward came and left and came again. There were already several groups of people coming and going. However, Su Qingsang, who had fallen asleep, didn't wake up. Hu Jinyao had been by Su Qingsang's side the whole time. He didn't have the time to care about others, let alone the child. Sun Huiya had clearly told him that Su Qingsang was fine. She had only fallen asleep because she had lost too much blood and exhausted her energy after giving birth to 2 children in a row. However, he couldn't be at ease until he saw Su Qingsang wake up. He held her hand and didn't let go no matter how the people who came to visit Su Qingsang came and went. It had been a day since Su Qingsang gave birth. Today was already the 3rd day of the new year. However, Su Qingsang still hadn't woken up. Hu Jinyao couldn't sit still anymore. He resisted the urge to ring the bell and told himself that he had to believe in Director Sun and believe that Su Qingsang was fine. It had been snowing for the past 2 days. In the evening, the snow outside finally stopped. Wu Jinyao looked out of the window and then at Su Qingsang. He pressed her hand against his face again. Qingsang? Look, the snow has stopped. Didn't you say that you like to make snowmen? Wake up quickly. When you wake up, I'll make one for you to see. Qingsang, you've given birth to a pair of twins. The doctors in your hospital all say that you're amazing. Don't you want to get up and see the children? To Hu Jinyao's disappointment, no matter what he said this time, Su Qingsang didn't wake up. His heart began to grow anxious. When Sun Huiya entered the ward to see Su Qingsang again, he couldn't help it. Chapter 645. You know, when Qingsang gave birth, she wasn't in a good state and she lost so much blood. This will make your body weak and you need to rest. Just because she needs to rest doesn't mean that she's unconscious, right? Hu Jinyao was really anxious. Didn't you say that she's fine? Since there's no problem, why isn't he waking up? I only said it's not a big problem. I didn't say she can wake up immediately. Then how will she wake up? Sun Huiya looked at Su Qingsang. After sleeping for a night, her complexion was a little better than yesterday, but it was still as pale as a sheet. The birth of the twins had greatly damaged Su Qingsang's vitality, so it was normal for her to be like this. However, looking at Hu Jinyao's anxious and worried expression, Sun Huiya didn't know what to say. Don't be too nervous. Maybe he'll wake up tomorrow. Tomorrow? You still have to wait until tomorrow? How could Hu Jinyao wait? He couldn't wait an hour, not even a minute. Li Qianxue looked at Hu Jinyao. She was shocked by Hu Jinyao's performance in the past 2 days. However, looking at Hu Jinyao's unshaven face and wrinkled clothes, she couldn't help but step forward and ask. Jinyao, since the doctor said that Qingsang will wake up tomorrow, you can just wait for another day. You see, you can't help much even if you stay here. Why don't you go back and tidy yourself up first? Hu Jinyao stood there without moving. He didn't want to leave Su Qingsang's side for a minute. Lu Tongjiao was there as well, followed by Ms. Zhou. Ms. Zhou was carrying a lunch box and a bag. Jinyao, my in-laws have a point. How can you look like this? Go tidy yourself up. As she spoke, Aunt Zhou stepped forward and handed the bag to Hu Jinyao. I've packed a few sets of clothes for you. You can go into the bathroom to take a shower and change your clothes. Even if you don't think about yourself, you should think about the child, right? How are you going to meet the child later when you're in such a mess? Hu Jinyao looked at Lu Tongjia, then at Li Qianxue, and finally at Su Qingsang, who was still asleep. He gave up and went into the bathroom to change. Li Qianxue and Lu Tongjia looked at each other. Both of them were worried. By right, she had already given birth and rested. Why hasn't he woken up after a day? Hu Jinyao took a shower and soon came out. After changing his clothes, he looked more energetic. As soon as he came out, he sat in front of Su Qingsang's bed, his eyes full of worry. Li Qianxue and Lu Tongjia were the only 2 elders in the ward. Old Master Li Hu Jinyao and the others had accompanied him for the whole day and most of the night. In the end, he couldn't take it anymore and went back to rest. Sun Huiya looked at Hu Jinyao, sighed and left. At night, the elders all went to sleep. However, Hu Jinyao refused to go to bed. He also refused to let the caregivers or the aunties take care of Su Qingsang. He had not taken a look at the child since it was born, and he did not want to. He just stayed with Su Qingsang and refused to leave no matter what. Qingsang, don't you want to wake up and see our child? You see, you haven't seen them yet. Although I haven't seen it either. Su Qingsang fainted not long after she was born. When the second child was finally born, Su Qingsang was completely exhausted. She couldn't wake up. So don't expect me to tell you what the 2 children look like. I haven't seen them either. Do you want to wake up soon? And then come see them with me? Qingsang, you were the one who asked me to be a father. I hope that I can experience all the first times in my life with you. His eyes were a little red. He didn't want to sleep. He gently placed his face beside Su Qingsang's arm. He just looked at her sleeping face. Honey, I'll wait for you. When Su Qingsang opened her eyes, she felt that her body was limp and she had no strength at all. She seemed to have had a long sleep. When she woke up, her spirit needed to recover bit by bit. She saw sunlight shining in the ward, and there was snow on the windowsill. The sunlight refracted on the snowflakes, shining with crystal clear light. It was exceptionally beautiful. Following the light, she saw the top of his black hair. Hu Jinyao was sleeping by her bed. His face was covered with stubble. There was also a circle of darkness under his eyes. She remembered hearing a lot of words when she was asleep. When she woke up, she didn't remember it clearly. She only remembered that Hu Jingyao said that he loved her. She raised her hand and gently stroked the top of his hair, then moved it to his face. As soon as her hand touched Hu Jinyao's face, he grabbed it. He raised his head and looked at her with wide eyes. There was obvious surprise in his eyes. "You're awake? Qingsang, you're awake?" Su Qingsang wanted to speak, but she couldn't. Her throat was so dry. Hu Jingyao poured her a glass of warm water and watched her drink it. Su Qingsang felt much better. Only then did she see Hu Jinyao's appearance clearly. He looked even worse than when he was asleep. "So ugly," Su Qingsang complained. Su Qingsang complained. She looked at his red, dark circles and stubble on his face. "You're not handsome anymore. You're awake. You're awake." Hu Jinyao didn't have time to pay attention to her teasing. He could only express his feelings by kissing her palm continuously. "You're awake, Qingsang, you're awake. It's really great. You're awake. Where's the child?" Su Qingsang felt her stomach was empty. Only then did she remember that she had given birth to the child yesterday. "How's the child?" "I don't know." "You don't know? You fainted after giving birth to the child. I didn't have time to take care of the child." Hu Jinyao couldn't hide his worry. Su Qingsang stared at him with her eyes wide open. Why are you like this?" "Then I've been sleeping for so long. You should at least take a look, right?" "No." Hu Jinyao was very willful. He held Su Qingsang's hand tightly, and the expression on his face was rare. "If you hadn't woken up, I would have sent them away." "Hu Jinyao." Su Qingsang was angry. She glared at Hu Jinyao for a long time and finally said helplessly, "Forget it. Bring the child to me now." "It seems to be in the incubator." Hu Jinyao wasn't sure. In fact, he hadn't cared about the child since it was born. He had focused all his attention on Su Qingsang. "Is the child okay? Why is it in the incubator?" Su Qingsang's face was full of worry. At this moment, a voice sounded. "Don't listen to his nonsense. The child is fine. The eldest went back to the nursery for observation yesterday, and the second is still in the incubator. Don't worry, everything is normal. I only let it stay in the incubator to ensure that it's safe." "Mom?" Su Qingsang saw Li Qianxue coming. She was carrying a big bag in her hand. Seeing that Su Qingsang had woken up, Li Qianxue heaved a sigh of relief. To be honest, if Su Qingsang continued to sleep, she wouldn't be able to take it. "I didn't expect you to wake up so early. It just so happens that there's breakfast here and the soup I asked the auntie to make. Qingsang, come and drink the soup when you wake up. Director Sun said that you've injured your vitality. Next, you have to listen to me and take good nourishment. You have to recover your body." "Mom, it's not like what you said. This nourishment isn't random." "I don't care. Drink this bowl of chicken soup first." "Okay. I'll drink it." Su Qingsang wouldn't argue with Li Qianxue over such a small matter. She thought that she had only slept for 1 day, but she didn't know that she had slept for 2 days. She got up and went to the bathroom to wash up. When she came out, she was told that she had actually slept for 2 days. She was stunned herself. "That's impossible, right? I've always thought that I was in good health. You're still talking about it? You gave birth on the 2nd day of the Chinese New Year and slept until the 4th day of the Chinese New Year. That's you." Li Qianxue's words were filled with heartache. Su Qingsang stuck out her tongue and sat down on the bed again. She cooperated and finished the chicken soup. She was really hungry. After a bowl of soup, she felt that her energy had recovered a lot. "I want to see the children. I'll take you there." Wu Jinyao had just gone to find a wheelchair. He knew that Su Qingsang would definitely want to see the children when she woke up. There were 2 children, one in the nursery and the other in the incubator. Seeing that Su Qingsang had woken up, Sun Huiya, who had specially come to see her, told her about the situation. "The older one is fine. The younger one was stuck in the uterus for a long time when he was born. His breathing was a little weak when he was born, but his vital signs are normal. There's no problem, don't worry." "Okay. Thank you, Director Sunday." DeBeo had stayed in the nursery for 2 days. His facial features had grown a little more than when he was born. His little face was red and he looked very healthy. DeBeo was 2.8 kilograms when he was born. Xiaobao was 2.5 kilograms. Xiaobao was lighter. But they're all very healthy. "Qingsang, you're amazing." Su Qingsang looked at the little baby and felt her heart soften. "Director Sun, can I carry him back to the ward? I want to breastfeed him." "Of course you can. You can try to let him drink milk, but you have to. I reckon that there won't be enough milk." Su Qingsang smiled. Whether it was enough or not, she didn't want to rely on others to breastfeed the child. She wanted to do it herself. After looking at Debeo, she went to look at Xiaobao. The little girl said that her skin wasn't red like that of ordinary children. Instead, it was white and tender. She was small and looked very cute. When Su Qingsang saw her daughter, she felt as if her heart was about to melt. It was completely different from seeing her son. Jinyao, that's our daughter. Yes. Wu Jinyao also saw her. It was his first time seeing his daughter. Her small face and tightly closed eyes. She slept there and didn't need to do anything, but Hu Jinyao could feel that his life was complete. He bent down and hugged Su Qingsang tightly. Wife, thank you. Only then did he truly feel that he had become a father. A son, a daughter, and Su Qingsang. They would be his entire world now and in the future. Thank you. You're welcome. Su Qingsang smiled. She glanced at Sun Huiya. Does she need to be observed for a long time? No need. She can leave the incubator tomorrow. Sun Huiya smiled. Your daughter is like you. She's also very strong. Su Qingsang smiled so much that her eyes narrowed. Her body hadn't fully recovered yet, so Sun Huiya asked her to go back and rest first. As for contact with the child, there was no rush. There would always be a chance. Li Qianxue had already seen her grandson yesterday, but now that she saw him again, she still couldn't help but want to hug him. He looks so good. He looks like Hu Jinyao when he was young. Lu Tongjia looked at the child from the side. Now that he had grown a little, his facial features were even more obvious. I think his eyebrows and eyes look a little like Qingsang's. He's so young and you can tell who he looks like. Su Yusin, who had rushed over, glanced at the little baby and clicked his tongue. Why do I feel like no one looks like him? How can you say that? Li Qianxue couldn't help but pat her son on the head. What nonsense are you talking about? It's true. Only you guys can tell who he looks like. I can tell. I think he looks like me. Su Yusin didn't stand on ceremony at all. Haven't you heard of him? Nephews look like uncles. Su Qingsang couldn't help but laugh. When she laughed, she felt a little pain in her abdomen. She just couldn't help it. You look like Qingsang. Who do you think the child looks like? So, Su Yusin said rather shamelessly, he has to look like me. Lu Tongjia couldn't stop laughing. She was very amused by Su Yusin. Su Qingsang looked at the scene in front of her and felt that it was really good. What's the child's name? Li Qianxue looked at Lu Tongjia. If the name isn't decided so quickly, let's call him by his nickname first. Debeo's nickname is Xiang Xiang, and Xiaobao's nickname is Nian Nian. Xiang Xiang? Okay. Lu Tongjia hugged him and thought about it. Looking at the tender little face, her eyes suddenly turned red. Mom. Hu Jinyao stood next to her and put his hand on Lu Tongjia's shoulder. He didn't say anything, but the name had already said everything. It's okay. I'm happy. Lu Tongjia looked at the children in her arms. The pain she had felt in the past had lessened a lot because of the birth of these two children. There were still regrets, but she would learn to let them go. People always had to look forward. A day later, Su Qingsang had mostly recovered. Because it was a natural birth, she was discharged from the hospital after observation. Following her out of the hospital were two adorable, fair and delicate babies. When they returned home, old Master Hua, who had wanted to celebrate, could only suppress his excitement under Su Qingsang's stop. The children were still young. It was indeed not good for there to be too many people coming and going. They could only wait until the full moon. But even if they couldn't celebrate, old Master Hua's joy was obvious. The relatives of the Hua family also knew. Other than those who had gone to the hospital before, many people came to see the twins. Of course, not everyone could see them. Su Qingsang was upstairs with the children. They weren't very familiar with her. They only knew that Su Qingsang had given birth to a pair of twins, but they couldn't see the two children. If Su Qingsang was alone, she wouldn't be able to take care of the two babies. Even with Li Qianxue and Lu Tongjia, it was the same. What would they do? The Hua family hired 2 nannies and 2 aunties to take care of the 2 babies. Li Qianxue took advantage of the New Year's holiday to stay. Every day, she looked at her grandchildren and felt her heart soften. After the 7th day, Su Yusin and Old Master Li returned to Lin City first. Li Qianxue continued to stay, wanting to spend a few more days with her daughter. Wu Jinyao returned to work. Although he wanted to spend more time with Su Qingsang and her children, there were still things in the company that he needed to deal with. However, he didn't go out to socialize at all. If there was anything, he would leave it to Yang Wenchang and Zhang Yang. If he really needed to make a decision, he would go to the company. He even threw some of the work to Hua Mingguang. And he called his behavior accompanying the children during the confinement period. Hua Jinyao learned how to be a stay-at-home father. There were nannies and aunties at home, but most of the time he preferred to do it himself. He still remembered how he felt the first time he hugged Xiang Nian. He also remembered how he felt the first time he hugged Nian Nian. When the two children were in his hands, he felt as if he had hugged the world. The honor of changing diapers for the first time fell on Xiang Nian. Perhaps it was because as the older brother, his body was better than his sister's. Xiang Nian ate more. In just a few days he had already distanced himself from Nian Nian. His face was red and he looked energetic. He cried loudly. Sometimes when he cried, it felt as if the entire floor could hear him. When he cried for the first time, Hua Jinyao was still a little confused. He understood that the child had only peed on his body, so he personally changed the child's diaper. He was a little clumsy, but he was especially careful. Su Qingsang looked at Hua Jinyao and suddenly had a feeling. She thought that Hua Jinyao would definitely be a very good father in the future. He would give all his love to these two children. Although he thought about it, what made his heart ache even more was Nian Nian. Contrary to what he thought, Nian Nian, who was born dozens of minutes later, was very quiet. She rarely cried. Even if she wanted to drink milk or change her diaper, she would only moan a few times. When she moaned, her face was red as if she was holding her breath. It looked very heartbreaking. Because of this, Hua Jinyao's heart ached even more for Nian Nian. He wished he could hold his daughter in his arms all the time. Every day, other than taking care of Su Qingsang, he spent the most time with the two children. When Xiang Nian was washing the third day with Nian Nian, the Hua family came. Afraid that he would startle the two children, Hua Jinyao only carried the twins for everyone to see, then carried them back to their room. He was very protective now, so he was even easier to wake up than Su Qingsang. The baby's room was arranged next to their room, and there was also a nanny and auntie to take care of the children. However, every time the child moaned, Hua Jinyao would wake up immediately. He had to work during the day and take care of the children at night. He was also responsible for accompanying Su Qingsang and slowly recovering with her. A few days later, Su Qingsang had recovered a lot, and she looked a little more plump. However, Hua Jinyao had lost weight. Seeing this, Li Qianxue was a little more satisfied with this son-in-law. There was no harm without comparison. Looking at what Hua Jinyao had done and thinking about what Su Qinghui had done, she could tell that Hua Jinyao truly loved Su Qingsang and treated her and her son well. She had nothing to worry about. She didn't tell Su Qinghui about the baby. If he wanted to know, he would naturally find out. Li Qianxue didn't think it was necessary to inform him. She would rather not see Su Qinghui. She didn't mention Su Qinghui and neither did Su Qingsang. The mother and daughter often stayed together during the day. Li Qianxue was afraid that Su Qingsang would be bored during her confinement, so she always talked to her and took care of her. Just like Hua Jinyao took care of the two children, Li Qianxue would rather take care of Su Qingsang herself. She often blamed herself for not doing enough in the past and wished that she could treat Su Qingsang better. After more than 10 days, the relationship between the two had improved a lot. Lu Tongjia had also taken this opportunity to improve her relationship with Hua Jinyao. There were 2 more children in the family. There were many topics that the elders could talk about. For example, today Nian Nian drank more milk. Thinking about it, she cried a few more times. Because of the existence of the 2 children, the Hua family suddenly had countless more vitality. That day Hua Jinyao returned home with a bag. During this period of time there were enough gifts. Whether it was Li Qianxue or Lu Tongjia, no one was surprised. When the things were carried upstairs, no one opened them. It wasn't until night time that everyone else had gone back to their rooms to sleep. The child was also carried to the baby's room to rest. Hua Jinyao carried the bag and sat down by the bed. What? So mysterious? Hua Jinyao said that Su Qingsang had a hard time giving birth, and he would bring her some surprises from time to time. However, this was the first time he had been so mysterious. Hua Jinyao didn't say anything. He just took out the things inside. There were 2 sweaters and 2 onesies. There were also 2 small vests, both made of wool. They weren't thick and were suitable for babies to wear. It could be seen that they were made of high-quality wool. The fine stitches were especially soft. It was very comfortable to touch. There was no need for Hua Jinyao to explain in detail. Su Qingsang knew who prepared this. Auntie is here? She came to look for you? Strictly speaking, she didn't come to look for me. She came to look for Yang Wenchang. Tianyu Group couldn't enter without an appointment. Xiang Kaiping didn't intend to disturb Hua Jinyao and let people know that she had a relationship with Hua Jinyao. She went to Tianyu Group, found Yang Wenchang and gave him this. Yang Wenchang had helped Hua Jinyao deal with many things in the past, so he naturally knew Xiang Kaiping. She said that she speculated that the two children should be about to be born during this period of time. It wasn't convenient for her to visit, but she had to prepare the gifts first. When Yang Wenchang told her that the children had been born, she was very happy. She was even happier when she heard that they had given birth to a pair of twins. She handed the gifts to Yang Wenchang and asked him to pass them to Hu Jinyao. That's great. That's great. Qing Sang is a lucky man. Please tell Jinyao not to tell Qing Sang that it was me who prepared it. She said that, but Hu Jinyao could not tell her. Moreover, with Su Qingsang's intelligence, it was impossible for her not to guess. Su Qingsang stroked the two sweaters, picked them up, and gently smelled them. She thought of something and suddenly smiled. Put them away. Ha! When my mother returns to Lin City, I'll take them out for the children to wear. Besides, it's too big now. I can't wear it. Okay. Hu Jinyao nodded and got up to pick up the sweaters inside. And this? A pair of longevity locks. In Lin City there was such a custom. If a grandmother became a grandmother, she had to prepare a longevity lock for her children. Li Qianxue had already bought one before and it was more exquisite than this. However, this one was also Xiang Caiping's intention. Su Qingsang's eyes were a little sore. She blinked her eyes, suppressed her emotions and looked at Hu Jinyao. Put them away. When they grow up, leave them to the children. The twins were children of the Hua family, so they naturally didn't lack such things. But this was a kind intention. Chapter 646. Jinyao? Yes. I suddenly feel so happy. Yes. Hu Jinyao hugged her and smelled the faint milky fragrance on her body. Ever since she gave birth, her body was full of motherly radiance. I feel very happy too. Su Qingsang pressed her face against Hu Jinyao's chest. A long time ago she had always thought that she was a pitiful little girl. An illegitimate daughter, no one doted on or loved her. Therefore she could only love herself. Now she suddenly felt that maybe she had been wronged in the past 20 years, so she was twice as happy in the future. Right. Su Qingsang thought of what she could do for Xiang Caiping. If Su Peijian can change after she gets out, let's not care about her anymore. She knew what Xiang Caiping cared about the most, and the only thing she could give her was not to destroy what she cared about the most. Of course, the premise was that Su Peijian lived up to her expectations and didn't mess around anymore. I promise you. Hu Jinyao could guarantee this. As long as Su Peijian didn't court disaster, he believed that she could continue her life after she got out. Moreover, with Su Peijian's ability she could live a good life. That was if she was willing. Speaking of which, she hadn't paid attention to Su Peijian for a long time. How is she recently? Not bad. Hu Jinyao really asked Yang Wenchang to ask about her today because of Xiang Caiping. She should be able to get a reduction in her sentence. It's been reduced by half a year now. Really? That was great. It meant that Su Peijian was really repentant now. Yes. I heard that she's teaching people in prison. A month before the new year, the prison organized a performance party. She was the leader. I heard that the response to several performances was good. The higher-ups are very satisfied with the current performance of their prison. It can be said that she made a contribution and got a reduction of half a year. If she is willing to continue like this, I think she can get out in less than 3 years. Regardless of whether her purpose was to reduce her sentence or not, with her pride, it was already progress that she was willing to do these things. That's great. Su Qingsang thought of Xiang Caiping. This way Andy can live a better life. Hu Jinyao didn't comment. Even if Su Peijian came out and stopped doing bad things, it was still unknown whether she could accept Xiang Caiping. Alright, you're still in confinement. You don't have to worry about other people's business. Sleep. I'm just saying it casually. I'm not tired now. I've let you guys do all the work. I have nothing to do at all. At home, there were 2 aunties and 2 nannies who specialized in taking care of the children. Apart from breastfeeding, most of the time she could not interfere. As for carrying a child, it was even more difficult. If it weren't for the fact that the 2 children were basically sleeping a lot now, the elders at home would be fighting to hug them. Old Master Huo was the happiest one. Recently he was in high spirits because of happy events. He was grinning from ear to ear. It wasn't that there weren't people of his age who had lived to his age, but there weren't many with 4 generations living under the same roof. There were 4 generations living under the same roof, but there was no family that had twins and they were a boy and a girl. How could old Master Huo not be proud? He felt as if the wind was blowing when he walked. Not only was old Master Huo happy, but Huo Yangyuan and Huo Yangxiu also liked to visit the children when they were free. After a few days, the facial features of the 2 little fellows had also slowly grown. With Hua Jinyao and Su Qingsang's good looks, the two babies looked like they were carved from jade and looked extremely cute. They looked like Hua Jinyao, but Su Qingsang's outline could be seen. Nian Yin looked more like Su Qingsang. However, Hua Jinyao's shadow could still be seen in her eyes. Speaking of which, the two little guys looked very similar. Looking at the two little babies every day, Su Qingsang felt satisfied with everything. The pain during childbirth and the lingering fear of almost falling asleep and not waking up became insignificant at this moment. After the first month, it would be the little baby's full moon. It was still very cold in Rong City, and Su Qingsang had just finished her confinement. She didn't want to celebrate too much, so she told Old Master Hua that she just wanted to treat her family to a meal to celebrate. How could Old Master Hua be willing? Su Qingsang tried to persuade him again and again, but she only said that the two children were still young. There was no need to be too ostentatious. Hua Jinyao knew what Su Qingsang meant. The children were still young and it was cold outside. If they wanted to hold a big party, they would have to bring the two children out to meet people. Su Qingsang felt sorry for the children and was unwilling. With Hua Jinyao's help to persuade her, and Lu Tongjia also felt that they were still young. Old Master Hua could only take a step back. It was fine if they didn't have a banquet for the small full moon, but they had to hold a big one for the big full moon. Hua Jinyao and Su Qingsang didn't have a wedding in Rong City. Old Master Hua also wanted to take this opportunity to give Su Qingsang. This time, Su Qingsang and Hua Jinyao couldn't go against Old Master Hua's wishes anymore. They could only agree. 3 months later, the weather in Rong City would also be warm. It would be appropriate to take the children out. Li Qianxue stayed in Rong City for more than half a month. She still had things to do, so she returned to Lin City after the Lantern Festival. Before she left, she was especially reluctant to part with Nian Yin. After returning to Lin City, she would talk to Su Qingsang at least 3 times a day. Every day before going to bed, she would look at her grandchildren before going to bed. As Nian Yin grew up, her facial features combined the advantages of Hua Jinyao and Su Qingsang. Unexpectedly, the more they looked, the more similar they became. Although they looked alike, their personalities were completely different. As Nian Yin grew up, his voice became louder and louder. He often roared when he was unhappy, and his cries could even be heard downstairs. Nian Yin was different. She rarely cried. Sometimes, when she saw Nian Yin crying, she would blink at him as if she didn't quite understand what he was crying about. At this time, something very interesting would happen. When Nian Yin didn't cry and only stared at him, he wouldn't cry anymore. Su Qingsang's greatest pleasure now was to observe the two children. She didn't know that children were really different every day after becoming a mother. She thought that Nian Yin's hair grew faster, but it was always darker. But what about Nian Yin? Her hair was thin. When she was born, it was a little yellow, but it slowly became darker. If she drank milk, Nian Yin would often drink all of Su Qingsang's milk. When Nian Yin wanted to drink it, it was gone. At this time, she would feel especially wronged, but she wouldn't cry. She would just look at him like that. Su Qingsang's heart melted. Next time, she would feed Nian Yin first. But after thinking about it, she didn't want to. When he made a fuss, it would be very loud. Sometimes Su Qingsang would wonder who this child looked like. Why was he so good at making a fuss? She heard from Lu Tongjia that Hua Jinyao was quite sensible when he was young. He was obedient and easy to take care of. He didn't even need to wake up at night. How did he turn into a little devil in Xiang? Su Qingsang had no choice but to gulp down the milk soup. She was afraid that 2 babies wouldn't be enough. Even so, Nian Yin still drank milk powder. When the little guy held the milk bottle in his mouth, he looked extremely pitiful. At first, he refused to drink the milk from the bottle no matter what. Later, he was so hungry that he barely drank 2 mouthfuls. After trying a few more times, he knew that he wouldn't be able to drink his mother's milk. In the end, he finally accepted the fact that he could only get the milk bottle. His resistance was a little less. Every time this happened, Su Qingsang felt both amused and helpless. There was nothing she could do. Nian Yin's physique was a little weaker than Nian Yin's. She really couldn't blame him for being biased. Even Hua Jinyao had the same thought. Boys have to be raised a little rougher. Isn't it just that he doesn't have milk to drink? He has such a bad temper. When he grows up, see how I'll deal with him. Although that was what he said, every time the child cried, he couldn't wait to immediately pick him up and coax him. Su Qingsang couldn't be bothered to expose his tough words and soft heart. Anyway, the child was his. When the time came, he would really deal with him ruthlessly. Time slowly passed by more than 2 months. Soon it was the 100th day of the 2 little guys' lives. Because old Master Hua said that they wanted to hold a big party, the Hua family had 100 tables in the largest hotel in Rong City. They invited all the people who were friends with the Hua family, their business partners, and their distant and close relatives. Xiang Xiang and Yen Yen, who were already 100 days old, now looked like two little dolls in a New Year's painting. They were pink and tender and especially likable. It wasn't the first time Xiang Xiang had gone out. He had gone out for a vaccination and a checkup at the hospital. However, it was the first time he had seen so many people. He wasn't afraid of strangers at all. He just rolled his eyes and looked around. If anyone reached out to hug him, he was willing to let them hug him. He smiled at whoever hugged him. Nian Yin wasn't afraid of strangers, but she didn't seem to like to interact with others. She was only willing to let her family hug her and didn't want anyone else. Finally, when she saw Hu Jinyao in a suit and tie, she immediately turned her head and kept looking at him. Nian Yin liked Hu Jinyao very much. As long as Hu Jinyao hugged her, she would obediently stay in her father's arms. Seeing that there were so many people, no matter who came, she didn't want to bother with them. She just buried her face in Hu Jinyao's arms. The others were fine, but Hu Jinyao's group of childhood friends had all come. Wan Xianying loved to play and Tang Mohan was also very lively. The group of people looked at the two little babies with envy and jealousy. Xiang Xiang was fine. He was willing to be hugged by anyone. Nian Yin couldn't do it. She refused to let anyone hug her. She would change her face the moment someone hugged her. Hu Jinyao couldn't bear to let them hug her either. The rules were that they could only look at her and not hug her. This little girl has such a bad temper. Wan Xianying clicked his tongue, but his eyes were filled with envy. Jinyao, I think your daughter is so cold and aloof. I don't know which kid will be able to catch up to her in the future. Tang Mohan looked at Hu Jinyao's two treasures with envy. To be honest, among these childhood friends, Hu Jinyao was the luckiest one. He went to open a branch office somewhere else and he came back with a wife. It wasn't a big deal to marry a wife. The key was that his wife wasn't an ordinary person. Look at how she gave birth to two children in one go. She had both a son and a daughter. What nonsense are you talking about? Hu Jinyao now treated his daughter like a pearl. When he heard Tang Mohan's words, he was unhappy. What kid? I'll destroy whoever dares to have any ideas about my daughter. Nonsense again. Su Qingsang couldn't stand it anymore. Will you be happy if no one wants your daughter when she grows up? How can no one want my daughter? Hu Jinyao retorted. I'm just saying that I won't let them have any ideas about my daughter. Yes. You can raise her at home for the rest of her life. I'll raise her for the rest of her life. It's not like I can't afford to raise her. Su Qingsang facepalmed. She had begun to understand Hu Jinyao's daughter complex over the past few days. Jinyao, don't be so stubborn. Li Junxing teased. Maybe if your daughter doesn't get married a few years later, you'll still rush her. Absolutely not. Hu Jinyao couldn't bear to part with her. I can't bear to hand my daughter over to those brats. Su Qingsang laughed and didn't want to talk to this person. How old was Nian Yen now? Why was he thinking so far ahead? Sure enough, when Li Junxing and the others heard Hu Jinyao's words, their eyes were filled with ridicule. Wan Xianying stepped forward and patted Hu Jinyao on the shoulder. I regret not getting married earlier. Otherwise I would have had a son. When I grow up, I'll chase after your daughter. Don't be in a hurry. It's not too late for you to have a child now. Cheng Xianyun watched the show and didn't mind the matter getting bigger. Hurry up and work hard. Xianying isn't the only one who can work hard. I can say that about me too. Tang Mohan joined in the fun. I'll hurry up and get married. When the time comes, we'll get married when we're kids. Get lost. Hu Jinyao didn't continue the conversation. All of you stay away from my daughter. The group of people laughed. Could be seen now. In the future, Hu Jinyao would definitely be a daughter lover. He wouldn't be able to run away from being a protective maniac. The banquet began and old Master Huo went on stage to speak. He was very happy today. At this age he had everything. He liked to see the family prosper. Today I'm sure everyone knows why I've invited all of you here. I'm not talented, but I'm indebted to everyone for taking care of me in Rong City all these years. Thank you for coming. He was being polite, but no one really thought that he had anything to take care of the Huo family. Everyone knows that this burden has to be passed down from generation to generation. What is passed down? It's people. Here I want to thank my granddaughter-in-law first. Thank her for bringing such a cute pair of twins to our Huo family. Thank her for going through so much hardship so that I can be promoted to be your great-granddaughter. I once said that my grandson, Hu Jinyao, as a man, the most insightful thing in his life is to marry a good wife. At this moment there was laughter below the stage. Old Master Huo waved his hand and continued, My granddaughter-in-law, Su Qing-sang, is not only a good partner of Hua Jinyao, but also a good daughter-in-law of the Hua family. Now the Hua family has a pair of twins. As an old man, I don't have much to give. I'll give my granddaughter-in-law 2% of the shares of the Tianyu Group under my name. How much was the market value of the Tianyu Group? 2% of the shares was quite shocking. With these shares, Su Qing-sang could enter the board of directors in the future. All the guests present immediately looked at Su Qing-sang, who was holding the child. She didn't expect such a thing to happen, so she couldn't help but glance at Hua Jinyao. Hua Jinyao's reaction was to pinch her palm, indicating for her to calm down. No. Why would I want the shares? Su Qing-sang said in a low voice. Hua Jinyao smiled at her. Grandpa gave it to you, so just take it. Don't worry. If you feel that it's too hot, you can give it to the two children in the future. While they were talking, old Master Hua had already told them about the gifts for the twins. There were 2 properties under his name, plus 2 funds worth more than 10 million yuan. Jinyao, isn't Grandpa giving too much? They were still 2 children. They didn't know anything and didn't know anything. So what if he gave it away? Don't think too much about it. Since these things are from Grandpa, just take them. But Su Qing-sang wasn't timid. She looked around. Almost all the relatives of the Hua family were here today. To be honest, she really wasn't used to old Master Hua being so high profile. It wasn't just old Master Hua. Hua Mingguang and Lu Tongjia both expressed their feelings after the birth of their children. The 2 little guys were still so young, but their assets were already quite astonishing. Most importantly, old Master Hua gave these things to Xiang Xiang and Yen Yen. Hua Jinyao didn't only have one brother. He was the only one. But what about Hua Mingliang and Hua Mingmei? There were other people there. Although they weren't married yet, they would get married sooner or later, and they would have children sooner or later. Old Master Hua was so high profile that other people would probably be jealous if they saw it. Silly. Hua Jinyao leaned over. You're worth it, and so are the children. Su Qing-sang knew that she couldn't change old Master Hua's mind. She looked at Hua Mingguang's family at the other table. Hua Yifan was still in prison, and Hua Yang and Hua Manzi were sitting with their parents. Of course, they couldn't cause any trouble on such an occasion. However, their expressions couldn't be considered happy. Ignore them. As if he knew what she was thinking, Hua Jinyao held her hand tightly. Don't worry. Believe me, I have the ability to protect you, and I also have the ability to protect the 2 little babies. Okay. Su Qing-sang wasn't too worried. She just felt that it wasn't good to be so high profile. However, since the truth was already like this, she could only accept it. Actually, you really don't have to be too nervous. Every child of the Hua family will be born with a corresponding property under their name. In the future, if Hua Yifan and the others have another child, they will definitely have the same. Really? Of course it's true. Hua Jinyao nodded. However, it was impossible for it to be as grand as Xiang Xiang and Yen Yen. Even if old Master Hua would be said to be biased. However, there were some things and people that he really favored Hua Jinyao more. This was something that others couldn't be jealous of. The full moon banquet was very lively. Xiang Xiang refused to sleep until he was too tired. He fell asleep in the auntie's arms. It didn't take long for Yen Yen to fall into a deep sleep. When she got home, the 2 little ones woke up together. When they woke up, they started to make a fuss, wanting their mother. Su Qing-sang had been tired all day, but she had no choice but to cheer up and feed the 2 little ones. It wasn't easy for her to coax the 2 little ones to sleep again. She could finally rest. However, before Su Qing-sang could walk to the door and return to her room, Yen Yen cried again. It was different from the previous soft moans. Yen Yen cried a little loudly this time. Su Qing-sang went forward to take a look and found that her daughter didn't look too good either. Yen Yen? Chapter 647. In the past few months, although Yen Yen didn't eat as much as she thought, her body had always been healthy. Su Qing-sang told herself not to be anxious. It might just be the child's normal crying. Yen Yen had always been obedient and never made people worry. Now she was crying so hard that her face was red. The auntie and the nanny were both there. They went forward to take a look. Could she be feeling unwell? Or did she get a stomachache? That's impossible. It's all milk. What can she get sick from eating? Could it be that he's shocked? Why are there so many people today? It's possible. In our hometown, we usually don't carry children out easily because we're afraid of being shocked. Hearing the auntie's words, Su Qing-sang became more and more anxious. Stop talking. Let me check first. She gave Yen Yen a basic checkup. She was a doctor, so she had all the medicine boxes at home. She took Nian Nian's temperature and found that she was fine. She then checked her respiratory tract and other things. At the same time, she changed her diaper and fed her milk. However, the child was still crying. While Su Qingsang was in a mess, Hu Jinyao arrived. What's wrong? Why aren't you sleeping? When Nian Nian saw Hu Jinyao, she cried even harder. Seeing this, Hu Jinyao quickly reached out and carried the child over. What's wrong, Nian Nian? Why are you crying? The moment he carried Nian Nian in his arms, she immediately stopped crying. Her little face pressed against her father and she sniffed. With her head tilted, the exhausted little girl fell asleep just like that. So you've been making a fuss all this time just for you to come? Su Qingsang had always known that her daughter was clingy to Hu Jinyao, but she didn't expect it to be to this extent. Every night before going to bed, Hu Jinyao would come to see his son and daughter, especially to hug his daughter. Nian Nian stopped crying when she was in Hu Jinyao's arms. She looked at Hu Jinyao as if she had been wronged. Hu Jinyao hugged Nian Nian and gently patted her back, coaxing her to sleep in a low voice. Su Qingsang stood not far away and watched this scene. Even though she had seen this scene many times in the past 3 months, it still didn't stop Su Qingsang from feeling warmth in her heart. Hu Jinyao was really a good father. In fact, he didn't need to coax her for too long. Before long, she fell asleep in Hu Jinyao's arms. Hu Jinyao waited until his daughter fell asleep before he gently placed her on the small bed. Hu Jinyao told the housekeeper and the maid to be careful, then held Su Qingsang's hand and went back to the room. Not bad, Mr. Hu. As soon as they entered the room, Su Qingsang was not stingy with her compliments. You're becoming more and more like a stay-at-home dad. Thank you for the compliment. Su Qingsang shook her head with a smile and thought of something else. Speaking of which, your daughter is really clingy to you. It was just that he didn't go to see his daughter before going to bed like before. How could she cry like that? Jealous? Hu Jinyao put his arms around her waist and teased her. Yeah, I'm jealous. How could Su Qingsang not be jealous? I tried to coax my daughter for a long time, but I still couldn't coax her. You made her obedient as soon as you took action. I gave birth to this daughter. Of course I'm jealous. Su Qingsang was exaggerating. In fact, during this period of time, Nian Nian had gotten used to being hugged and coaxed by her father for a while before she fell asleep. Hu Jinyao picked Su Qingsang up and made her look at him. Okay, then I'll start coaxing you now, okay? Okay. Su Qingsang nodded and raised her head to look at Hu Jinyao. How are you going to coax me? Like this? As he spoke, he kissed Su Qingsang's lips. Su Qingsang hooked her arms around his neck and took the initiative to kiss his lips. However, when Hu Jinyao's hand moved down, she grabbed his hand and left his arms. She stepped back a little. Okay, I'll go take a shower. After a tiring day, she was covered in sweat. It's okay, let's shower together. He reached out to hug her again. Su Qingsang glared at him, then quickly left his arms like a loach. After entering the bathroom, Su Qingsang looked at herself in the mirror with mixed emotions. In the past 3 months, because of giving birth, she had gained a lot of weight before giving birth. Although her figure had recovered a little after giving birth, she looked even more voluptuous than when she hadn't been pregnant. When she took a shower, she stood in front of the mirror and looked at herself. Su Qingsang pinched the small circle on her lower abdomen that hadn't been completely eliminated in time. She looked a little depressed. What's wrong? Hu Jinyao, who had just entered the door, saw Su Qingsang looking at herself in the mirror. The expression on her face definitely couldn't be considered happy. Hu Jinyao. Su Qingsang wasn't usually such a lack of confidence. Logically speaking, she had given birth naturally and could recover very well. However, she was pregnant with twins after all, so it would take a little longer than ordinary people. Look at me, I've gained so much weight. He didn't know if he could recover. If he continued to be like this, he would really look ugly. How did you gain weight? Hu Jinyao placed his hand on her abdomen. Indeed, there was a small circle of flesh. I think this is just right. My hand feels much better. Hu Jinyao, I'm serious. I'm serious too. Hu Jinyao's hand moved up rather naughtily. He looked at Su Qingsang's face in the mirror and kissed the back of her neck. Especially the hand here. It doesn't feel too good. You, wife? In the past few months, he had been understanding that she had just given birth and it was hard for her to take care of the baby every day. He had been a vegetarian for a long time. No matter what, don't even think about escaping today. I'm already like this. Su Qingsang looked at the flesh on her abdomen that hadn't completely disappeared. She was really depressed. She could have recovered better, but during this period of time, in order to let the baby have enough milk, she hadn't stopped feeding the milk soup. She ate a lot, so it would be strange if she wasn't fat. She even despised herself for being like this. Hua Jinyao looked at her, turned her body around and looked at her very seriously. Wife, in my heart you're the most beautiful. What's more, Hua Jinyao stroked her abdomen and looked at her figure, which was indeed much fuller than before. You became like this because of me. Do you think I would despise you? Su Qingsang didn't say anything. No woman could really not care about her appearance, but Hua Jinyao's words undoubtedly made her extremely happy. Hua Jinyao, are you serious? Wife, I will definitely try my best to prove it to you today. He stood up, easily picked her up and walked to the bathtub. You're even more attractive to me than before you had a child. The annual Christmas was here again. Today was a little special. It was Su Qingsang's third birthday after her marriage to Hua Jinyao, and it was also her second birthday. After all, her birthday was written as the 26th. Last year, Hua Jinyao had planned to celebrate Su Qingsang's birthday, but Su Qingsang was pregnant and couldn't move freely. He wanted to take her out to play but he couldn't. This year there was a chance. Hua Jinyao helped Su Qingsang apply for leave in advance. Then he handed the two children to Lu Tongjia and Hua Mingguang. The winter in Rong City was getting colder, but Hua Jinyao was very excited. He brought Su Qingsang to the airport early in the morning. Where are we going? On the way to the airport, Su Qingsang was still a little hesitant. How many days are you going to take me? Xiang and Yen. Before she became a mother, she really didn't think she would have such a mentality. But ever since she became a mother, as long as she was away for a little longer, she would start to miss her two children. Every day when she went to work, she would hug her two babies for a long time before leaving. It was even more so when she came back at night. Under such circumstances, Su Qingsang really couldn't bear to part with Xiang and Yen. Wife. Hua Jinyao held her hand tightly. I know you can't bear to part with your two children, and I can't bear to part with them either, but we need some private time. No matter how reluctant he was, he didn't want to let Su Qingsang suffer. His son was very important to him, and his daughter was also very important to him. But Su Qingsang was more important. But, no buts. If I can bear to let go of Yen for a few days, you should also learn to let go and miss Yen for a few days. Su Qingsang's lips moved, but in the end she could only listen to Hua Jinyao. When they arrived at the airport, they didn't go to the waiting room. Instead, they took the VIP passage and went straight to the boarding gate. Hua Jinyao wasn't in a hurry to get on the plane. Instead, he held Su Qingsang's hand through the huge glass wall. Actually, the gift I want to give you is here. So I want to bring you to take a look. What? What gift would be at the airport? Look carefully. Hua Jinyao pointed outside and Su Qingsang followed his finger. There was a plane parked there. There were cyan cloud patterns on the white fuselage. Following the long cloud patterns, she saw three very eye-catching words on it. Qingsang? It's for you. Hua Jinyao hugged her waist and pressed his chin against her neck. Do you like it? Su Qingsang blinked. Even though she had received many gifts over the years, she had never thought that she would receive a plane one day. You Hua Jinyao, aren't you exaggerating? I'm not exaggerating. Hua Jinyao didn't think he was exaggerating. Wife, with this plane. Next time you can fly wherever you want. For example, if you want to go to Lin City to see your mother, you just need to call Wenchang and ask him to arrange it. You can go back to see your mother at any time. That was too exaggerated. Su Qingsang turned to look at him. She was in a state of complete shock. Let's go. Where to? Didn't I say to go to Lin City to see your mother? Hua Jinyao told her his plan. We'll go to see your mother first and stay in Lin City for a few days. Then we can fly to the Maldives or the Aegean Sea. You see, we'll go wherever you want to go. By the way, I bought 2 small islands in the Pacific Ocean. Why don't I take you to see them? Stop. Su Qingsang interrupted him. How many days do you plan to take me away? It doesn't matter how many days. Believe me, Mom and Dad will definitely take good care of the 2 little babies. So, you really don't have to worry too much. Su Qingsang wasn't worried, but she couldn't bear to part with them. Ever since the 2 children were born, they had never been separated from her for a day. Besides, don't you miss your mother? Yes. Li Qianxue often flew to Rong City to see the 2 babies when she was free. Not only would she come, but Su Qinghui would also come. But coincidentally, Li Qianxue and Su Qinghui seemed to have a tacit understanding. Except for the time when the children were born and when they were 1 month old, the 2 of them almost didn't meet. Every time Li Qianxue was about to leave, Su Qinghui would come. Sometimes when Su Qinghui was about to leave, Li Qianxue would come. The reason for this was of course because Li Qianxue didn't want to meet Su Qinghui, so she would ask clearly every time. After spending more time together, their relationship naturally became closer. Speaking of which, the last time Li Qianxue came to Rong City was more than a month ago. Su Qingsang really missed her a little. And sure Mengwan, you said you wanted to see her last time. Did you forget? Yes, I didn't forget. Then let's go. Go spend time with your mother and then spend time with your grandfather. See Sure Mengwan and your former colleagues. Then we'll find another place to fly to and play. Su Qingsang couldn't argue with him. She also knew that in the past year, from her pregnancy to childbirth to the birth of the child, she really hadn't had a good time to relax. Now that she was doing this, she could just treat it as a vacation. Speaking of which, this was her first time taking a private plane. It was indeed as comfortable as she had seen on TV. There was not only a living room, a meeting room, a study, and 2 bedrooms on the plane. Su Qingsang sat on the sofa and looked at the wings outside. There were also 3 words on it, Qingsang. This was her plane, a gift from Hua Jinyao. It was a wonderful feeling. She had never thought that she would one day have a plane. Hua Jinyao. Thank you. Honey, you never have to say thank you to me. Hua Jinyao held her hand and said very seriously. I want to thank you. Thank her for appearing in his life, thank her for bringing him a different life. Thank her for loving him. Thank her for fulfilling his life. Hua Jinyao. The moment the plane soared into the sky, Su Qingsang hugged Hua Jinyao's waist. I love you. Honey, I love you too. The Qingsang plane took the 2 of them to another city. It also witnessed the love between the 2 of them. Su Qingsang believed that they would definitely work hard and live a good life. Outer world, Samsara. 3 years later. Hua Yanjun climbed up the cabinet and rummaged around. She didn't find what she was looking for, so she pouted and climbed down from the cabinet. However, her movements were too big. When she got down from the chair, she lost her footing. She was about to fall to the ground. A pair of small hands quickly held her back and steadied her. Hua Yanjun turned around. When she saw Hua Yanjing, she smiled widely and jumped down from the small chair. Brother. Hua Yanjing hugged his little sister, who was about the same height as him, and put her down. What are you looking for? Hua Yanjun pouted again when she heard that. There's nothing left. There's nothing left. You're looking for this, aren't you? Hua Yanjing stretched out his hand, and there were 2 milk candies in his little hand. Wow, brother, how did you find it? Little idiot. Hua Yanjing opened one of the milk candies and put it into his little sister's mouth. I saw it when mommy hid the candy. Brother, you're so smart. Why didn't I see it? Stupid. Who told you to take a nap? You're the stupid one, Hua Yanjing replied, but she wasn't angry. The candy was so sweet. She opened the other candy in Hua Yanjing's hand and stuffed it into his mouth when Hua Yanjing wasn't prepared. Don't you want it? He knew that his little sister loved candy the most. One for you, one for me. As Hua Yanjing spoke, she looked around and finally made a shushing gesture at Hua Yanjing. We promised mommy that we wouldn't eat candy. If we only eat 1 a day now, mommy won't find out, right? Hua Yanjing said that, but when she finished eating the candy, her eyes began to blink again. Brother, I still want to eat. What should I do? You just said that you would only eat 1. Then 1 more? Just 1? Hua Yanjing looked at his sister's little face and helplessly took out another candy from his pocket. Here. Thank you, brother. Brother is the best. Cough. The sudden cough startled Hua Yanjing, and she almost dropped the candy in her hand. She and Hua Yanjing turned around at the same time and found that Hua Jinyao had arrived. Daddy. Daddy. The 2 little guys threw themselves into Hua Jinyao's arms. He stretched out his arms, one on the left and the other on the right, and picked up the 2 children. Tell Daddy, what were you doing just now? I didn't do anything bad. Hua Yanjing shook her head quickly. I was playing with my brother. I didn't do anything bad. You didn't do anything bad? Hua Jinyao blinked at his daughter. As she gradually grew up, her features resembled his, but there were still some differences. Oh. Then what is this? Hua Jinyao looked at his daughter's hand, which was still tightly holding a candy. However, her hand was too small. Even if she held it tightly, she couldn't wrap it completely. Candy. Hua Yanjing lowered her head, but soon raised it again to look at Hua Jinyao. Daddy, I only ate 1 really. Hua Yanjing raised 3 fingers as if to make a promise. When she saw Hua Jinyao's serious face, she leaned over and kissed him on the cheek. Daddy. I promise I won't eat it, okay? Don't tell mommy. Okay. Before Hua Jinyao could say anything, Hua Yanjing spoke first. Daddy, I found the candy. I gave it to my sister. If you want to punish me, punish me. Can you not tell mommy? The two little guys blinked their eyes at Hu Jingyao. He listened to their childish words and hugged their little bodies tightly. His eyes were a little hot. The familiar scene was happening again after more than 20 years. He buried his face in Hu Yanjin's neck and didn't say anything. Hu Yanjin was a little nervous. She glanced at her brother and then at Hu Jingyao. Finally, she said as if she was throwing away everything, "Then if you want to tell mommy, can you ask mommy not to punish me? I promise I won't eat candy again, okay?" Hu Jingyao shook his head and put down the two little guys. When he shook his head, Hu Yanjin's face fell. "Daddy, I told you I gave the candy to my sister. If you want to punish me, punish me." Hu Yanjing was quite manly. Hu Jingyao glanced at him and reached out to rub his head. "Why would I? Don't worry. Mommy won't punish you." In this family, Su Qingsang definitely had a high status. She indeed didn't allow the children to eat too much candy, especially Hu Yanjin. The little ball from back then had now grown into a cute little girl that could melt a person's heart. She had a tooth decay which was caused by her fondness for candy. Ever since Su Qingsang found out, she didn't allow her to eat candy anymore. However, Hu Yanjin just couldn't resist the charm of candy. Lu Tongjia, who was used to spoiling her children, would secretly put a few in the house from time to time. It looked like she was hiding it well, but in fact the two children would always find it. Hu Yanjing in particular seemed to always be able to see where the adults hid the candy. Really? Hu Yanjin wasn't sure. She blinked her black grape-like eyes at Hu Jingyao. Hu Jingyao was in a daze for a moment. At that moment he seemed to see Hu Wushuang's shadow. However, he knew that Hu Wushuang was Hu Wushuang, and Hu Yanjin was Hu Yanjin. He wouldn't confuse the two of them, but at that moment he really felt that the gap in his heart that he had always thought had never disappeared was quietly being filled. His beloved little daughter had healed the wound in his heart in such a reincarnated way. She was his angel. He hugged his daughter tightly and stood up. Hu Jingyao looked at her. "Nian Nian, but you have to promise me that you won't eat candy again until your tooth decay is cured, okay? Okay. If you promise me, I'll ask your mother to allow you to eat one a day in the future. How about that?" "Really?" Hu Yanjin blinked her eyes in surprise. "Then will Mom agree?" "Yes, really. Don't you believe in Dad?" "I do. Dad is the best." Hu Yanjin kissed Hu Jinyao's cheek again. Hu Jingyao smiled. He held his daughter and held his son's hand. "In order to thank Nian Nian for her trust in Dad, Dad will take you out to play today." "That's great." Hu Yanjin clapped her little hands. "Then brother wants to go too." "Of course. Let's go." Hu Jingyao walked out with the two children. "But we have to pick up Mom first." "Let's go. We're going to pick up Mom." Hu Yanjin and Hu Yanjing got into Hu Jinyao's car together. The car stopped at the entrance of the hospital where Su Qingsang worked. Su Qingsang was on the night shift yesterday and only got off work this morning. When she came out of the hospital, she saw 3 figures, 1 big and 2 small, standing at the entrance of the hospital waiting for her. Su Qingsang smiled and quickened her steps towards the 3 people she loved the most. "Nian Nian, think about it. Do you miss Mom?" "Yes. Yes." "Did you guys behave when Mom was on duty last night?" "Yes." "Yes." "Really?" Mom, I secretly ate a candy, but I promise I only ate one, really only one. Mom, I gave it to my sister. Don't blame her." "Why are you guys so disobedient? You actually secretly ate candy?" Su Qingsang looked at the 2 little guys with a straight face. "To punish you, huh? Ha. To punish you, you guys can sleep on your own today." Ah. Chapter 648. Shi Mingwan looked at the little baby in Su Qingsang's arms. There was a flash of envy and love in her eyes. Today was Su Qingsang's baby's 1-month birthday party. She had come once when Su Qingsang gave birth. This was her 2nd time coming to Rong City. So cute. This is the sister, right? Yes. This is Nian Nian, the sister. Has the name been decided? Yes. Her name is Hu Yanjin. Su Qingsang held her daughter, her face full of satisfaction. The older one is Hu Yanjing. Good name. Shi Mingwan nodded and her gaze fell on the pink baby's face. The most important thing is that she's really cute. She's so cute that I want to steal her home. Do you like it? Su Qingsang blinked at her. If you like it, hurry up and find a man and have one. I think you're right. Wan Xianying had arrived at some point. At this moment, he stood beside Shi Mingwan and looked at her with a hint of eagerness in his eyes. Sister-in-law. Wan. Shi Mingwan nodded at Wan Xianying as a greeting and quickly stood up. Qing sang, I'm going to the bathroom. Go ahead. She was obviously avoiding Wan Xianying, which made Wan Xianying's expression turn ugly. After Shi Mingwan left, he looked at Su Qingsang. Sister-in-law, I'm not that bad, am I? Su Qingsang couldn't answer. Everyone had their own eyes. Wan Xianying was good, but Shi Mingwan didn't like him, so there was nothing she could do. Xianying, listen to my advice. You'd better find another target. Wan Xianying didn't give up and said it casually. In fact, he had long given up. Hearing Su Qingsang say this, he wasn't angry. Okay, I want to see who subdued this flower in the end. Shi Mingwan actually knew that Wan Xianying wouldn't do anything, but facing someone who had once passionately pursued her, she always felt a little uncomfortable. In fact, she believed that Li Junxing might not have deep feelings for her. It was just the desire to conquer, just like that person. Shi Mingwan, who was a little absent-minded, walked a little faster. She didn't notice that someone happened to turn around in front of her and happened to come towards her. She accidentally fell into the other party's arms. Sorry. Shi Mingwan quickly apologized and wanted to leave his embrace. She was wearing high heels today, so she accidentally tripped over her left foot with her right foot. Not only did she lose her footing, but she also fell into his embrace. Shi Mingwan had never encountered such an embarrassing situation. She almost didn't dare to raise her head. However, he heard a low chuckle from above his head. Then, his body was supported by someone and he stood firm. Using this movement, she raised her head and realized that the person in front of her was very familiar, as if she had seen him somewhere before. I'm sorry. Shi Mingwan bit her lip and felt a little embarrassed. It's okay. Li Junxing shook his head. Today was the first month of Su Qingsang and Hu Jinyao's child. He had just flown over from Lin City today. He didn't expect to encounter such a romantic encounter as soon as he arrived. I'm so sorry. Shi Mingwan knew that the people who came today were either rich or powerful. They were all business friends of the Huo family. Therefore he was indeed a little embarrassed. It really doesn't matter. Li Junxing smiled and took a step back. He looked at Shi Mingwan with a flash of amazement in his eyes. Speaking of which, he had never seen Shi Mingwan before. When he was in Lin City, it was unlikely that Hu Jinyao would invite Shi Mingwan to a gathering with them. When Shi Mingwan came to Rong City to play and was brought to play with Hu Jinyao's group of childhood friends, Li Junxing was in Lin City. Therefore, Su Qingsang and Hu Jinyao had been married for more than a year, but Li Junxing had never seen Shi Mingwan. Shi Mingwan didn't wear a formal dress when she came over today, but she was very formal. She wore a classic Hepburn black dress with a red suit jacket on the outside. Red and black were matched by her, and there was a hint of passion in her cold elegance. It was a very suitable color scheme, and Shi Mingwan had put on light makeup today. Her facial features were already very bright and beautiful. Looking at her like this, she looked even more interesting. If one looked closely, they could see the faint worry in Shi Mingwan's eyes. He gave off a contradictory feeling, yet surprisingly harmonious feeling. Shi Mingwan wanted to laugh. She rarely made stupid mistakes like today. It was really the first time. Are you also here to attend the full moon banquet? She looked at Li Junxing and felt that he looked a little familiar. After asking this question, her eyes suddenly widened as if she had remembered something. Yes. Li Junxing looked at Shi Mingwan. He had never seen her before. You too? Yes. Shi Mingwan nodded. The moment Li Junxing nodded, she completely remembered who he was. You're Mayor Li? You know me? Li Junxing listened to Shi Mingwan and tilted his head. You're from Lin City? Yes. Shi Mingwan was really a little excited now. Although she knew that the Huo family knew people who weren't ordinary, and she had also seen some people who often appeared on TV just now, she was surprised to see them here. But Li Junxing was different. He was the mayor of Lin City. She was a small citizen and it was her first time meeting the mayor. This made her a little excited. Hello, Mayor Li. This isn't Lin City. You don't have to be so polite to me. Li Junxing looked at Shi Mingwan. Are you Hu Jinyao's friend? Or relative? Since he called Hu Jinyao by his name, it meant that Li Junxing had a good relationship with Hu Jinyao. Shi Mingwan also relaxed a little. I'm Su Qingsang's friend. Li Junxing knew that Su Qingsang was from Lin City. He didn't ask any more questions. I see. Then please help yourself. I'll go in and greet the old master first. Okay. Shi Mingwan waited until Li Junxing's figure disappeared before she recovered from the shock. She didn't expect that she would have the chance to meet the mayor of Lin City. This feeling was really subtle. She walked towards the bathroom at the other end of the corridor. At the corner there was the men's bathroom outside and the women's bathroom opposite. Before she could go in, her hand was grabbed by someone. Before she could react, she was pulled into the men's bathroom. Shi Mingwan was shocked. Her first reaction was that she had met a pervert. Her second reaction was that this was a 5-star hotel. All the people who came today were famous people, so it shouldn't be. Her guess was quickly confirmed. A familiar smell came to her nose. She was very familiar with this smell after a year. She suddenly raised her head, but what she saw was Zhang Hao's sinister face. She didn't have time to care about his ugly expression. Instead, she immediately realized the situation in front of her. Are you crazy? This is the men's bathroom? She was extremely panicked. She wanted to leave this place as soon as possible, but Zhang Hao blocked her lips in the next second. It was as if she had been bitten by a piranha. She only felt pain on her lips. She couldn't escape, she couldn't leave. Her entire body was tightly trapped by him. This was a 5-star hotel. There were constantly people coming and going outside. This was still the men's bathroom. Zhang Hao's attitude made Shi Mingwan think that she was a prostitute for a moment. She struggled up, raised her hand and was about to swing it at Zhang Hao's face. Zhang Hao's reaction was faster than she thought. He quickly grabbed her hand and used force to restrain her hands behind her back. Because of her resistance, the force on his lips became heavier. Shi Mingwan's lips were bitten by him until they hurt. She wanted to retreat, but Zhang Hao's strength wasn't something she could compare to. Woo-woo. She glared at him. Her eyes were filled with resistance, dissatisfaction, and anger. Zhang Hao met her gaze for a long time. Finally, he let go of his hand and retreated a little, but he still trapped her in his arms. Shi Mingwan's breathing was a little breathless. Her lips hurt. She suspected that he had bitten her lips. Zhang Hao, let go of me. She wanted to push him away and leave this place. If she saw her in the men's bathroom, even if she didn't do anything, even if no one here knew her, it would be enough to make her feel embarrassed. Wan Xianyang, Hu Jinyao's childhood friend. The second young master of the Wan family. Now he runs 2 antique shops. Among them, Gulangshuan's business is the biggest. Every year, it brings Wan Xianyang hundreds of millions of yuan in profits. Shi Mingwan's body froze. She didn't understand what Zhang Hao meant by this. Li Junxing, the mayor of Lin City. His family has been in the right place for generations. Li Junxing is young, but he's already the top leader of Lin City. In the past year, through the investment of a master, he's developed and renovated the old city area of Lin City. He's very popular in Lin City. Shi Mingwan's back was tightly pressed against the door. She didn't understand what he meant. I didn't expect you to be so good at seducing men. You're actually able to attract the favor of 2 men like this in one go. Shi Mingwan watched as he said such words in such a mocking tone. Without thinking, she raised her hand and slapped him in the face. However, before her hand could touch his face, he had already grabbed it. He leaned forward and pinned her between the door and his chest. Are you angry? Zhang Hao, not every man is like you. Like me? What do you mean? Zhang Hao leaned over and got close to Shi Mingwan's face. His breath pointed at her cheek. She turned her face away as if she was avoiding him, bit her lip, and pinched the nails of her hand that he didn't grab into her palm. What? She didn't understand how things had turned out like this. More than a year ago, Shi Mingwan hung up on Su Qingsang. She felt a little lonely. Su Qingsang followed Hu Jinyao back to Rong City for the Mid-Autumn Festival. She was married. Although she didn't forget her friends because of love, she really didn't have much time to see Su Qingsang. She felt a little lonely, but Hu Jinyao seemed to be a good person. Although he had no money, he still lived in Su Qingsang's house. The conditions were also ordinary. But as long as he treated Su Qingsang well, it was fine. She looked through all the orders she had received before. Recently, the studio's business had been good. Ever since Su Qingsang got married, her orders had increased a lot. Even though Su Qingsang was the illegitimate daughter of the Su family, her wedding was still quite eye-catching. She designed her wedding dress herself. After the wedding, the studio's business had improved a lot. Sister Shi, the customer from last time is here again. After knocking on the door, the secretary Xiao Qiu poked his head in. Which one? It's that Miss Chen. I'll go take a look. When Shi Mingwan heard the surname Chen, she immediately thought of a person. There were 2 people sitting in the reception room. One was Qin Feifei, whom she had met last time, and the other was Zhang Hao. Seeing the 2 of them appear at the same time, Shi Mingwan's expression changed for a moment. It was only for a moment. She quickly composed herself and turned to look at Qin Feifei. Hello, Miss Chen. Last time, Qin Feifei came over and said that she wanted to order a dress, but after saying the design requirements she didn't say anything else. Hello. Qin Feifei was gentle and weak. When she saw Shi Mengwan she stood up rather politely. Miss Shi, I might have to trouble you this time. I have a banquet in a few days and I want to choose a dress for myself. Although Shi Mengwan mainly designed wedding dresses, she also had dresses here. Looking at Qin Feifei she nodded. No problem. May I know what Miss Chen's request is? White. And be more generous. Qin Feifei smiled quite appropriately. Why don't you introduce it to me, Miss Shi? Okay. Shi Mengwan nodded and brought Qin Feifei to try on the dress. Before leaving she glanced at Zhang Haoze. He sat there with his legs elegantly crossed. He was holding a magazine in his hand and casually flipping through it. Qin Feifei had already walked to the door, but she suddenly turned around and walked in front of Zhang Haoze. Brother Hao, I'm going to try on the clothes. Wait for me. Okay, Zhang Haoze replied. His gaze didn't even leave the magazine. Qin Feifei seemed a little dissatisfied. She couldn't help but bend down and kiss Zhang Haoze on the cheek. Thank you, Brother Hao. You're so nice to me. Shi Mengwan maintained a straight face and didn't look in that direction. Therefore, she didn't see that Zhang Haoze's brows were slightly furrowed because of Qin Feifei's actions. Qin Feifei also knew that she couldn't go too far. If she went any further, Zhang Haoze would be unhappy. She couldn't help but feel a little depressed, but she hid it very well. Shi Mengwan brought Qin Feifei to try on the clothes. Along the way, her mind couldn't help but think of Zhang Haoze. He had changed a lot now, but no matter how much he changed, she could still recognize him. Lowering her eyes, Shi Mengwan forced herself to retract her thoughts and focus on Qin Feifei. This is our dress exhibition area. Other than our own designs, there are also some custom-made clothes from abroad. As a studio, of course, they had to try their best to meet the needs of people at different levels. This one isn't bad. Qin Feifei picked up a white dress and compared it to herself. Miss Qin, you can go and try it on. Shi Mengwan looked at Qin Feifei's figure. Miss Qin is so slim. You should wear size S, right? Yes. Qin Feifei nodded, but she placed the dress in Shi Mengwan's hand. I'm sorry, but I don't think I like the lace on it. It's okay. You can take your time to look at it. Okay. Qin Feifei nodded and turned to look at her as if she had thought of something. Miss Shi, your studio is called Song Seeking. What's the name? Shi Mengwan pursed her lips slightly. Life is like a dream and a song, so it's called Song Seeking. I didn't know that Miss Shi was such an elegant person. Miss Qin, you're too polite. Shi Mengwan stood behind her, but she knew very well that this name didn't mean that. Song Seeking. Looking for dear brother. But for so many years, so long, there was no news of her at all. It wasn't easy for her to see him, but her dear brother had completely forgotten about her. These two. As they spoke, Qin Feifei had already picked out 2 dresses. Shi Mengwan led her to the fitting room. When she turned around, she realized that Zhang Haoze had arrived at some point in time and was standing at the entrance of the exhibition area. Her assistant, Xiao Ji, accompanied Qin Feifei to try on the clothes. At this time, there were only Shi Mengwan and Zhang Haoze in the exhibition area. The visitor was a guest. Shi Mengwan tried her best to make her expression look normal and calm. Mr. Zhang, Miss Qin should be out in a while. You can sit here and wait for her. Zhang Haoze glanced at her, then slowly walked to the sofa that Shi Mengwan pointed at and sat down. This exhibition area was designed to have a very fashionable feel. There were dark patterns on the large pieces of light pink and white. There were all kinds of clothing styles. If one looked closely, they could see the patterns on them. The sofa was geometric. It didn't surround the coffee table in the middle like normal shops. Instead, there were small tables on both sides with catalogs on them. There was also a small vase with a thin neck with a rose in it. Zhang Haoze looked around and stopped when he passed by Shi Mengwan's face. He couldn't tell that this woman had good taste. Shi Mengwan called out. Soon Xiao Qiu brought in 2 cups of camellia tea. Mr. Zhang, please have some tea. Brother, how do I look good? Qin Feifei had already put on her clothes and came out. When she saw Zhang Haoze come in, she was obviously very happy and turned around in front of him. Zhang Haoze didn't comment. Not bad. Just not bad. Qin Feifei was obviously disappointed, but only for a moment. Then I'll go change again. Zhang Haoze didn't say anything. Qin Feifei seemed to be a little sullen. She went in to change into another set of clothes. She changed into the second set, and Zhang Haoze still said it wasn't bad. Shi Mengwan stood there with her eyes focused on her nose and her nose focused on her heart. Chen Feifei didn't ask her and she didn't intend to ask. In fact, both sets were not bad and suited her very well. Chen Feifei changed to the third set and got Zhan Hao's approval. Then I'll take this set. Chen Feifei finally had a smile on her face. She turned to look at Shi Mengwan. Miss Shi, do you have men's clothes here? Pick a set for Brother Hao too. Yes. Although she only designed women's clothes here, it didn't mean that she didn't have men's clothes. There were foreign high-end custom-made clothes, and there were also collaborations with some brands. Brother Hao, you can pick one here too. Zhan Haoza sat still. I have clothes. Then just treat it as accompanying me. You won't wear matching clothes with me when we go to a banquet, right? When she said the words matching clothes, she seemed a little embarrassed. She looked at Zhan Haoza tentatively again. Zhan Haoza glanced at her and finally got up to pick out clothes. Miss Shi, help me pick out a set. This was the first time Zhan Haoza spoke to Shi Mengwan since he came here. Shi Mengwan looked at him and finally picked out a set of clothes for him that she felt were very suitable and matched the one Chen Feifei was wearing just now. This set. Put it together with the one Feifei wore just now. It wasn't that Shi Mengwan hadn't met straightforward customers before, but there weren't many such straightforward customers. She took the card from Zhan Haoza's hand and asked Xiao Qiu to swipe the card for Zhan Haoza. Chen Feifei was obviously very satisfied with Zhan Haoza's cooperation. The smile on her face became a little more sincere. Brother Hao, you're so good to me. However, you still have to try it. If it doesn't fit, can't you ask her to change it? Although I believe you look good in anything. But still try it. As she spoke, she held Zhan Haoza's arm. Zhan Haoza's body stiffened for a moment, but it was only for a moment. Then I'll go try it on. With the excuse of going to try on the clothes, he successfully broke free from Chen Feifei's hand and went to try on the clothes. The dark suit, the close-fitting cut, and Zhan Haoza's standard inverted triangular figure. This suit suited him very well. Brother Hao is so handsome. Chen Feifei's eyes were filled with undisguised admiration. When she was about to approach, Zhan Haoza entered the fitting room again and changed his clothes. Is it okay? It's okay. Shi Mengwan had already asked Xiao Qiu to wrap up the clothes. May I ask if you want to take them away or send them to your door? We'll take them away directly. Chen Feifei hooked her hand around Zhan Haoza's wrist. Brother Hao, it's getting late. Let's go to the bacon restaurant for dinner. I heard that there's a new chef there. He's very good at cooking Cantonese cuisine. Let's go and have a try? Zhan Haoza didn't say anything and left directly. Shi Mengwan watched the two of them leave, and her mind couldn't help but think of that year. She watched helplessly as her dear brother got further and further away from her. She shook her head and reminded herself in her heart that Zhan Haoza was no longer her dear brother. She asked Xiao Qiu to pack up the clothes. Shi Mengwan planned to go back to her office and finish the design drawing that she had received earlier. However, just as she sat down, Xiao Qiu came in again. Sister Shi, I picked this up from the article just now. It was a man's wallet. The black leather was very textured and it could be seen that it was very valuable. This should be Mr. Zhan's. Just leave it. Contact him according to the phone number left by the client later. Okay. Xiao Qiu took the wallet and was about to leave. Shi Mengwan suddenly called out to him, Wait a minute. Just leave it. It's almost time to get off work. I'll call him to inform him. You guys can get off work when it's time. Xiao Qiu didn't think too much about it. Shi Mengwan stayed in the office alone all year round to draw until late. She had a lounge upstairs. If it was late, she would sleep in the studio. Since she said that she would inform the other party, she put down the wallet and left. Shi Mengwan picked up the pen and was about to continue drawing, but when she saw the wallet, she couldn't help but reach out to take it. However, just as she picked it up, she forced herself to put it down again. In her heart, she had already accepted that that man wasn't her dear brother, so why should she look at his things? He returned his attention back to his drawing and before he knew it, 3 hours had passed. When she finished drawing, she realized that the night sky had darkened. It was already very late. No wonder she was so hungry. She wanted to eat something to fill her stomach. However, her gaze landed on the wallet again. She was about to reach for her bag when she paused. She thought about it, picked up the wallet again and handed it to Zhan Haoza. Mr. Zhan. Zhan Haoza stared at her face for a long time, then reached out and took the wallet. The moment he took the purse away, his fingertips brushed against the back of her hand. His hands were a little cold. It was already past the Mid-Autumn Festival. Lin City was very hot during the day but it was a little cold at night. However, she still felt that his hands were a little too cold. The moment he retracted his hand, he met Jean House's gaze. He was still staring at her. His eyes were long and narrow and his gaze was sharp. The bridge of his nose was high and his thin lips were slightly pursed. Shi Mingwan stared at his lips and suddenly had an urge to lean forward and kiss his thin lips. His lips were as cold as his hands, or were they warm? Realizing what she was thinking, Shi Mingwan's face slowly turned a little red. She had never been in love before, and such a secret thought made her feel a little ashamed. Mr. Jean? Jean Hausa stared at her face and finally retracted his hand. He wrapped the money up. Shi Mingwan heaved a sigh of relief. The atmosphere was too awkward for a man and a woman to be alone in the same room. However, Shi Mingwan quickly realized that she was happy too early. Her studio was on the third floor of an office building in a pretty good area in Lin City. There was a corridor that wasn't long from the studio, and then there was the elevator. When the two of them walked to the elevator together, Shi Mingwan realized that she was going to take the elevator with Jean Hausa. Realizing this, she took 2 steps back. Jean Hausa happened to press the elevator button at this moment. When he saw her actions, he turned around and glanced at her. "Oh, Mr. Jean, you go first. I seem to have forgotten to lock the door." As she spoke, she took another step back. The elevator arrived at this moment, and Jean Hausa stood there without moving. "You locked it just now." "When I came out, you locked it." "Was that so?" Shi Mingwan felt inexplicably awkward. The elevator opened and Jean Hausa stood there looking at her. She had no choice but to grit her teeth and quickly walk into the elevator. Jean Hausa looked at her back and followed her into the elevator. The door closed and only the two of them were left in the narrow space. Shi Mingwan had never been like this before. The short 3 floors made her feel like a year. Jean Hausa was standing less than 50 centimeters away from her. She could even smell the scent on his body. It was faint, similar to the scent of mint. The last time she thought he was her dear brother, she smelled the same scent. She moved to the side without a trace, putting some distance between the two of them. When she looked up, she realized that Jean Hausa was staring at her face. Her moving footsteps were frozen there. Her face was a little hot. Such an abnormal person wasn't like her usual self at all. The elevator didn't move. She couldn't help but look up at the elevator and realized that they had actually stopped on the 3rd floor. She was stunned for a moment. She didn't understand why Jean Hausa didn't press the floor button. She looked at Jean Hausa and he was also looking at her. Shi Mingwan felt uncomfortable being stared at by him. She didn't understand what he wanted to do. She didn't want to stay in such a confined space with Jean Hausa, so she could only choose to press the one. The moment her hand was about to touch the button, Shi Mingwan realized that when she leaned close to the button, she was also close to Jean Hausa. Her arm brushed past his body, and her shoulder was very close to him. Such a close distance made Shi Mingwan momentarily lose her composure. She subconsciously looked at Jean Hausa and found that he was also looking at her. His deep gaze was deep. She couldn't see the meaning in his gaze, but she instinctively murmured those 3 words. "Dear brother?" Jean Hausa's gaze suddenly changed and became a little more gloomy. Shi Mingwan was shocked by the sudden change in his gaze and subconsciously wanted to retreat. However, she forgot that she was leaning forward at this moment. With this retreat, her entire body lost balance. She subconsciously wanted to grab something, but there was nothing else in front of her other than Jean Hausa. In a flash, Shi Mingwan gave up and let her body move forward. She wanted to use her hands to stabilize herself. A big hand appeared on her waist. Jean Hausa's hand was placed on her waist. Her body was half suspended and pressed against his body. Her hands were forward, and her entire body was in a strange posture. Shi Mingwan was embarrassed again. She was in a rather sorry state. She used both her hands and feet to try to leave Jean Hausa's body. However, in her panic, her hand hit his face instead. She didn't really hit him but brushed past his face. She was shocked and quickly retracted her hand. As a result, her upper body couldn't exert any strength, and she leaned completely on Jean Hausa's body. "Throwing yourself into my arms?" Shi Mingwan's face was very red. She mumbled and wanted to explain herself, but Jean Hausa easily scooped her body up at this moment and pressed her against the elevator wall. "Jean? First, you mistook me for someone else and then you threw yourself into my arms? Miss Shi, do you always treat your clients like this?" His almost humiliating words made Shi Mingwan's face instantly turn as pale as blood. She wanted to push Jean Hausa away, but she realized that his body was as immovable as a mountain. "Mr. Jean, please let go of me. You're not calling me dear brother anymore?" Jean Hausa stared at Shi Mingwan's red face because of embarrassment and shyness. His slender and slightly cold fingers gently caressed her cheeks. Shi Mingwan's body instinctively trembled. She looked above Zhang Haoze. "Mr. Zhang, please let go." There were cameras in the elevator, and she really had no intention of becoming the news person of the entire building tomorrow. Zhang Haoze stared at her face and didn't retreat. Instead, he put his hand past her side. Shi Mingwan became more and more nervous. At this moment, Zhang Haoze pressed the button for the first floor. The moment he retracted his hand, he approached her. Their faces were less than 5 centimeters apart. He stared into her eyes. Shi Mingwan had a pair of extremely beautiful almond-shaped eyes, and the corners of her eyes were slightly raised. She looked seductive, especially when her red lips were slightly opened, as if she was kissing him seductively. Zhang Haoze's eyes darkened slightly, and his tone was even colder than before. "If you don't want a man to have sex with you in the elevator, don't make such a seductive move next time." The redness on Shi Mingwan's face disappeared completely. The elevator had already reached the first floor. Zhang Haoze let go of his hand and took a step back. Without looking at Shi Mingwan, he stepped out of the elevator and left. If it weren't for her last bit of willpower, Shi Mingwan would have slid to the ground. She had never been humiliated like this in her life. Seduction? He really dared to say it. If it weren't for the fact that he was the dear brother that she had always missed. If it weren't for the fact that she always had different feelings for him. How could she let herself lose her composure like this? Seeing that the elevator was about to close again, Shi Mingwan grabbed the bag on her shoulder and quickly stepped out of the elevator. The night wind blew and it was a little cold. It also allowed her to completely calm down. Some people were no longer the people they used to be. She didn't need to care. She didn't need to care. She just needed to pretend that that person wasn't her dear brother. She just needed to find her dear brother again. Su Qingsang didn't stay in Rong City for long. She only stayed for a week before coming back. Every time she went out, she would bring a gift for herself. This time was no exception. Shi Mingwan had something on her mind. But she couldn't let Su Qingsang see it. She used her laughter to distract Su Qingsang's attention. She didn't realize that there was something wrong with her. After all, he was the dear brother that she missed so much. Shi Mingwan couldn't stand him talking to her like that. Fortunately, she was used to adjusting her mood. Within 2 days, she let herself put this matter aside. Chen Feifei came again later, but she came with a friend of hers. Not seeing Zhang Haoze, Shi Mingwan couldn't tell whether she was disappointed or relieved. Half a month had passed. That day, Su Qingsang rarely had time and said that she wanted to treat her to a meal. The two sisters hadn't had a gathering for a long time. Shi Mingwan went and found that Huo Jinyao was also there. At first, she was a little uncomfortable, but now she was completely used to it. With Huo Jinyao and Su Qingsang at the scene, it wouldn't be called showing off. It was called dog butcher. The two of them had to show off their love during a meal, which made her a little speechless. After a few teasing words, she felt a little stifled. They didn't even talk about dating and jumped straight to marriage. They were also doing very well now. Maybe she really had to listen to Su Qingsang's suggestion and forget her dear brother and find a man. Maybe he could be like Su Qingsang and Huo Jinyao? Although she thought so, she clearly knew that it was unlikely. After separating from Su Qingsang, Shi Mingwan wasn't in a hurry to go home. Feeling a little annoyed, she unconsciously drove the car to the entrance of a small alley. The alley was very dark, and only the intersection had a faint light. Shi Mingwan didn't feel afraid. She stared at the small alley. She could almost imagine what kind of scene it would be like if she were to pass through this alley. It had been more than 10 years. Many places in Lin City had changed, but this place hadn't changed until now. Passing through the entrance of the alley, there were small alleys on both sides. They were of different sizes and there were many people living there. Almost all the people at the bottom of Lin City's society lived here. She looked at the hidden darkness behind the intersection and got out of the car. She was very bold today. In fact, she used to come to this place often. She wasn't afraid of encountering danger. Although the people here weren't very friendly, there really weren't any bad people. There was a breakfast stall at the outermost part of the alley. It was closed now. Further inside there was a small shop. It was also closed today. She still remembered that she was very hungry at that time. She wanted to eat, but she didn't have any money on her. What happened after that? Dear brother found a steamed bun and opened it, half for each of them. He said that it was half for each of them, but in fact her half was more and his half was less. She said, "Dear brother, you're bigger? Do you eat this big piece?" "No need. I'm a man. I can withstand hunger better. You eat." A teenager wasn't a man at all, but Shi Mingwan felt that the young man was an indomitable man. He was so thin and young, but he raised her for a whole year. At that time she was eating the steamed bun and watching dear brother finish the small half of the steamed bun in a few bites. She knew that dear brother wasn't full. She deliberately left half of it, saying that she didn't have an appetite today and couldn't eat any more. Before dear brother could react, she put the steamed bun into his mouth. At that time, how did dear brother react? Shi Mingwan's memories were interrupted. She heard a voice coming from the fork in the alley not far ahead. It was getting late and Shi Mingwan didn't intend to cause trouble. She turned around and wanted to leave, but she heard a voice that wasn't unfamiliar to her. Cut the crap. Do you want to come one by one or do you want to come at me together? This voice was clearly Zhang Hao's. Shi Mingwan was stunned for a moment. Not only did she not leave, but she also walked closer. Very arrogant. Since that's the case, let's teach him a lesson. A sharp male voice sounded. Shi Mingwan quickly heard muffled groans and the sound of fighting. She could tell that there were quite a few people on the other side. Using the dim street lamp at the entrance of the alley, she approached very carefully. Using a telephone pole as cover, she carefully poked her head out. She saw a group of people fighting. No, it wasn't right to say that it was a group of people fighting. It should be a group of people fighting around a person. The person who was surrounded was naturally Zhang Hao. When she saw that face clearly under the street lamp, Shi Mingwan almost screamed. Why was he here? Also, why were so many people beating him up? Could it be that he got into trouble again? She thought of that year. Dear brother worked very hard every day to support her. Once, when he was about to come back, he was stopped at the entrance of the alley by two youths who looked taller and stronger than dear brother. The other party wanted dear brother to hand over all his money. How could dear brother be willing? In order to protect the money that he had earned with great difficulty, he refused to hand it over. In the end he was beaten up by the two of them. At that time it was also like now, two people beating him up. Back then, Zhang Hao might not have had the ability, but now he should be different, right? He was someone who was going to marry Qin Feifei. How could such a person provoke these people from the underworld? Shi Mingwan's mind was running wild. However, her eyes were filled with worry. She wondered if she should call the police now and ask them to come? Or should she think of a way to lure those people away? However, before Shi Mingwan could do anything, she saw the situation in front of her clearly. She, who had been letting her imagination run wild just now, didn't notice that Zhang Hao had already beaten that group of people to the ground. Zhang Hao was still standing. He was a little far away, so she couldn't tell if he was injured. However, she was stunned to see that the people who had just attacked him were all lying on the ground. There were cries of pain in the alley. It could be seen that they were all seriously injured. Such a change shocked Shi Mingwan. When did dear brother's skills become so good? Tell your master that no matter what he wants to do, I'm here and will accompany him at any time. You, one of the people lying on the ground said for a long time, but he didn't come up with anything new. Over and over again it was just a few threatening words. Shi Mingwan saw that Zhang Hao was fine and was about to leave, but Zhang Hao had already started to walk in this direction. Shi Mingwan was shocked. Before she could think of where to hide, Zhang Hao had already walked to her side. When he passed by her, he glanced at her and then stopped in his tracks. He looked at her and saw that half of her body was hidden behind the telephone pole, but it was completely useless. She was still clearly seen by others. Have you heard enough? Shi Mingwan was shocked. She didn't expect that she would be discovered by him. She had nowhere to hide even if she wanted to. She looked at the person behind her who was still lying on the ground in pain. Shi Mingwan took a big step back. She didn't know what was under her feet, but she almost stepped on it. However, this time she balanced her body well and didn't let herself fall again. What a coincidence. Mr. Zhang. Zhang Hao ignored her greeting. He looked at the people at the other end of the alley and finally, his gaze fell on Shi Mingwan. Chapter 650. Zhang Hao narrowed his eyes slightly. His voice wasn't loud, but the coldness that emanated from it once again explained his current emotions. No. Shi Mingwan quickly explained, I didn't follow you. I just happened to pass by. Passing by? Zhang Hao's gaze became sharper. Passing by here? Shi Mingwan was a little embarrassed. Indeed, he wasn't here to pass by. He was only here to reminisce about the past. She couldn't help but glance at Zhang Hao. What about him? He should be considered a successful person now, right? Why did he appear here? Realizing that she had asked that question out loud, Shi Mingwan's expression became a little more uncomfortable. Zhang Hao didn't answer her question. He stared at her face and suddenly approached her. Does Monsieur live nearby? No. Then why is Monsieur here? His slender legs took a step forward and successfully fixed Shi Mingwan's body between her and the telephone pole. Facing such a predicament again, Shi Mingwan felt a little uncomfortable. She leaned back and didn't try to push him away. She knew the difference in strength between the two of them. Is this your home? This was the second time he had faced such a situation, especially when they had such an unpleasant meeting the last time. Shi Mingwan's tone wasn't very polite. She had always been a woman with a sharp edge. It was only because he was her big brother that she had been enduring in front of him. If this place isn't yours, then what right do you have to question me like this? Jean Hauze narrowed his eyes slightly because of her sharp retort, and his body suddenly moved closer. He lowered his body and confronted Shi Mingwan. The malice in his eyes made Shi Mingwan's back turn cold, but she refused to admit defeat. Since you can come to this place, I can naturally come as well. Mr. Jean wasn't a police officer. Can you please let go of me now? You want me to leave? The alley was dark, and not far behind him, he could still hear the wailing of the group of people. In front of him was Jean Hauze's body. No matter how he looked at it, the atmosphere was very strange. Shi Mingwan didn't want to stay any longer, so she saw that Jean Hauze didn't plan to move aside. She stooped and tried to escape sideways. Jean Hauze did not move. When she retreated, she touched his arm. He heard an extremely soft, muffled groan. Shi Mingwan, who could have left, suddenly stopped in her tracks. She looked at Jean Hauze, who was standing next to her, and her gaze fell on his arm. She saw the faint blood stains on his elbow. You're hurt? Shi Mingwan suddenly lost her cool. Instinctively, she held his arm. Are you okay? Jean Hauze frowned slightly. He didn't even notice that he was injured. What do you think? Does it hurt? Do you want to go to the hospital? 3 words of concern in a row made Jean Hauze's brows furrow even tighter. Shi Mingwan wasn't short, but she was holding his arm so he could only see the top of her head. Shall I take you to the hospital? After Shi Mingwan said this, she looked up at him and met his cold expression. Only then did she remember that the man in front of her was no longer her dear brother. Her hand jerked back as if she had been struck by lightning. Annoyed at himself for being a busybody, he turned around to leave. Jean Hauze followed beside her at this moment. After taking a few steps, Shi Mingwan suddenly stopped and looked at him. Didn't you say you were going to take me to the hospital? She did say that, but that was what she thought. Shi Mingwan's footsteps became faster and faster. Jean Hauze's footsteps didn't need to be fast. His steps were much bigger than hers. Shi Mingwan felt the footsteps behind her, and her emotions were very complicated. When he walked to her car and opened the door, Jean Hauze also got into the car. She sat in the driver's seat and looked at Jean Hauze. Mr. Jean said that I seduced you yesterday. Aren't you afraid that you won't be able to escape if I pester you? The night was blurry. The dim streetlights made her facial features look hazy, and her watery eyes were a little provocative. Drive. Jean Hauze retracted his gaze and didn't look at her again. He leaned back against the back of the chair. Shi Mingwan gritted her teeth and wanted to chase Jean Hauze out of the car. She glanced at his side profile and started the car in the end. Don't go to the hospital. 5 extremely faint words. If it weren't for the silence in the car, Shi Mingwan wouldn't have heard it. She couldn't help but look at him again. She found that Jean Hauze's eyes were half closed and he was leaning against the car seat as if he was about to fall asleep. Shi Mingwan retracted her gaze and stepped on the accelerator. On the way, Shi Mingwan turned around and looked at Jean Hauze. His arm was still bleeding. Her heart trembled slightly. She thought of her dear brother. More than 10 years ago, Shi Mingwan, who was only 12 years old, got lost from her parents. Although she said she got lost, she actually ran away from home. She was from Lin City, but she wasn't from Lin City. She was from a small county town under Lin City. Shi Mingwan's father was the eldest in the family. He had 2 younger brothers. The small county town where Shi Mingwan lived was very patriarchal. Shi Mingwan's 2 uncles both had sons. Only Shi Mingwan didn't. Shi Mingwan's grandmother was very dissatisfied with Shi Mingwan's mother because of this. Shi Mingwan's mother didn't have a good life in the Shi family. Because she had injured her body when giving birth to Shi Mingwan, it wasn't easy for her to get pregnant again. Until Shi Mingwan was 9 years old, she hadn't had a second child. Shi Mingwan's father was the eldest of the 3 brothers of the Shi family, but he didn't have a son. Shi Mingwan's grandmother disliked this eldest daughter-in-law more and more. It wasn't until Shi Mingwan was 11 years old that her mother finally got pregnant miraculously. Shi Mingwan thought that this mother would definitely give birth to a younger brother. This way her mother's life should be better. But who knew? The second child, Shi Mingwan's mother, gave birth to was still a daughter. Shi Mingwan's grandmother's expression became even uglier. Even Shi Mingwan's father's heart was heavy. There was clearly a little sister in the family, but no one had a smile on their faces. Shi Mingwan was already sensible. She didn't like the atmosphere at home. She hated how her grandmother scolded her every day and said that her mother was a hen that didn't lay eggs. She hated how her father frowned because she was a daughter. She hated her mother even more. It was clearly not her fault for giving birth to a daughter, but she had to bear all the responsibility on herself. No matter how much she hated that family and the atmosphere at home, she still tried her best to comfort her mother and help her take care of her little sister. She comforted her mother and told her that giving birth to a boy or a girl wasn't something she could decide alone. She didn't need to blame herself or feel guilty. Even if her mother didn't listen at all, she still had to say it. She had learned all of this from her textbooks and had seen it on TV. Also, men and women were already equal now. The teacher had already said so, but her mother still thought so. She was backward and ignorant. Regardless of whether her mother listened or not, she tried her best to maintain the peace and harmony in the family. Until she heard her grandmother persuade her father to send her sister away. She could give birth to another child then. She said that if her mother didn't agree, she would let her father take the second or third uncle's children and adopt them. Shi Mingwan was finally angry. Her little sister was so cute. Even if she was a girl, she was still her father's child. Her father actually wanted to give her sister away? Shi Mingwan, who had been taking care of her sister for a few months and had feelings for her, was furious on the spot. What are you giving her away for? If you want to give her away, just send me away. My sister is still so young. Haven't you thought about what will happen to her in the future if you send her away? Grandma didn't expect her to hear it. She exploded and started to curse. After scolding Shi Mingwan's mother, she started to curse Shi Mingwan. She said that it was all her fault and that she didn't bring her younger brother. Shi Mingwan was furious. If that's the case, then I'll leave this family. I want to see if you can do as you wish without me. Shi Mingwan's father and grandmother both thought that she was saying it out of anger. But Shi Mingwan was serious. She really ran away from home. She took her usual New Year's money and pocket money and directly picked a car from town to the county town. That day there was still the last bus to Lin City in the county town. Shi Mingwan was really bold. She got on the bus to Lin City just like that. But it wasn't until night fell and the car stopped at Lin City station that she realized what she had done in a moment of impulse. She, a 12-year-old girl, had run away from home just like that. Shi Mingwan, who got out of the car, had a moment of regret. She had never left home in her life. All her knowledge of the world, other than school, was books and television. Holding the little money she had left, Shi Mingwan didn't know where she could go or what she could do. Sister Xiuxiu, who lived next door, said how much money she could earn a year working outside. But she was too young now. At the age of 12, although she was already close to 1.5 meters tall, she was still a child. Moreover, she didn't have a degree. She hadn't even finished junior high school. How could she find a job? She walked along the streets of Lin City Station. The more she walked, the more remote she became. Later she walked to this area. This was the famous civilian area of Lin City. At that time, although this place wasn't dirty and messy, it definitely wasn't very clean. Shi Mingwan got hungry as she walked. She picked a small shop and bought a piece of bread and a bottle of water to fill her stomach. However, she didn't know that she was being targeted. Although she was only 12 years old, her mother was a famous beauty in the area. Although Father Shi's personality wasn't strong enough with his grandmother, he was also very good-looking. Shi Mingwan perfectly inherited all of her parents' traits. She had almond-shaped eyes, willowy eyebrows, delicate skin and shiny black hair. The 12-year-old Shi Mingwan could already foresee what kind of beauty she would be when she grew up. What would a lonely and beautiful little girl experience? Shi Mingwan wasn't an idiot. Although she lived in a small county town, the teachers would also give safety education. When she was eating the bread, she realized that someone was staring at her from not far away. At that moment, Shi Mingwan was very flustered. Once again she began to regret her impulse. But for her to go home now, not only did she have no choice, but she also didn't want to. Her family wasn't poor, but they weren't rich either. After buying the bus ticket, she didn't have much money left. Even if she wanted to go home now, she didn't have the money to buy a ticket. More importantly, she didn't have a car to go back now. She looked at the two people who looked like hooligans staring at her from afar. She gritted her teeth and entered the small shop again. She took the opportunity to buy another piece of bread and made a bet with herself. She told the shop owner that she was being followed. She asked the lady boss if there was a back door in the shop. She wanted to leave through the back door. Fortunately, the lady boss was a good person. She told Shi Mingwan that there was a small door at the back beside the bathroom. However, she also told her that after leaving this place, there would be a small alley which was intricate. It was easy for people who didn't know to get lost here. Shi Mingwan wasn't afraid of getting lost now. It was better if it was intricate. That way, if those two people targeted her, she could think of a way to escape. She had already decided to go to the police station after leaving this place. She would let the police send her home. Granny Guan's expression would be so ugly, and her curses would be so unpleasant to hear. Anyway, she couldn't really do anything to her. At most, she would just beat her up. She left by the back door and got lost in the maze of alleys. It was fine if she got lost, but the most important thing was that any sound would scare her. She was very afraid that those two people would catch up to her and do something to her. It was also at this moment that she heard some extremely chaotic sounds. It was a dark night, the street lights were dim, and the weather was similar to today. She heard a lot of footsteps, and a few of them were very clear. Boss said that it's fine if we don't take his life. Just cripple him. Teach him a good lesson and teach him a lesson. Shi Mingwan had already forgotten that she was also being watched. She walked around the alley and saw that in the alley, a group of people were surrounding a young man and punching and kicking him. Under the dim light, she couldn't see the young man's face clearly. However, the moment the young man raised his head, he met a pair of extremely gloomy and sharp eyes, like those of a wolf in the dark. Shi Mingwan was shocked by that gaze. She heard the young man speak in an unpleasant voice that was unique to the voice-changing period. "You'd better kill me. Otherwise, I'll definitely return what you did to me today 10 times, 100 times in the future." "Yo, this kid is quite arrogant." The voice from before sounded again. "Since that's the case, if I don't show you some power, I'll be letting down my brother Chang's reputation. Brothers, beat him to death." The group of people attacked even more fiercely. Shi Mingwan heard a muffled groan and the sound of fists landing on a person's body. She felt pain just by looking at it. However, the young man refused to beg for mercy. Not only did he refuse to beg for mercy, but he also seized every opportunity to fight back. His eyes were especially bright in the dark night. Shi Mingwan had never seen such a person before. He was clearly beaten to such a state, but he could make himself look calmer and calmer than them. She looked around, but there was no one here. There were too many people and she was only a little girl. She still had a headache. She didn't know how she could help the other party. It wasn't until she saw the man who spoke pick up a steel pipe and was about to hit the young man's hand. Shi Mingwan didn't even think about it and shouted in a louder voice, "Uncle Police, it's over here. There are people fighting over here." As she spoke, she grabbed the stone on the ground and kept hitting it at a trash can beside her. She stomped her feet on the ground with all her might. It felt like there were many people walking at the same time. The man called Brother Chang who was holding the steel pipe froze for a moment and snorted. He threw the steel pipe and kicked the young man. "Brat, consider yourself lucky. Brothers, let's go." Shi Mingwan kept stomping her feet and kept hitting the trash can with the stone. The sound became denser and louder. The group of people quickly dispersed. She wasn't in a hurry to go forward. Instead, she waited until the footsteps could no longer be heard and no one appeared. Only then did she carefully poke her head out to see if everyone had really left. However, she met the extremely sinister eyes of the young man just now. That wolf-like gaze stared at her in the darkness. Shi Mingwan was shocked and took a big step back. She, who didn't stand properly, fell to the ground just like that. The bag that she was holding just now fell to the ground. The loaf of bread also fell out of the bag. She didn't dare to pick it up. She just propped herself up with both hands on the ground and stared at the young man in a daze. He looked very disheveled, very disheveled. His nose was bruised and his face was swollen. His body was covered in blood, and his hands were also covered in blood. There was still blood on his clothes. The blood that flowed from the corner of his mouth was especially frightening on a night like this. Shi Mingwan had saved him on impulse just now, but now that she had saved him, she started to feel conflicted again. The person she saved couldn't be a bad person, right? Or, the young man didn't look at her. He bent down and picked up the bread that had fallen to the ground. Shi Mingwan became more and more nervous, but the young man tore off the plastic wrap on the outside of the bread and finished it in a few bites. What kind of operation was this? Shi Mingwan looked at the young man and swallowed her saliva. She wanted to say that he ate her bread. However, the young man also saw the bottle of water in the bag. He glanced at her, took the bottle of water, and drank the remaining half of the bottle just like that. Throwing the bottle on the ground, the young man glanced at Shi Mengwan and turned to leave. However, Shi Mengwan stopped him. The young man turned around and looked at Shi Mengwan again. Shi Mengwan's lips moved. She wanted to say, "Are you going to leave just like that after eating my food?" However, the words that came out of her mouth were, "You threw the trash on the ground. That's not right." A trace of mockery flashed across the young man's hostile face. He took 2 steps forward and stood in front of Shi Mengwan. She was still sitting on the ground and the young man was standing there. The young man was nearly 1.7 meters tall. Shi Mengwan shrunk her neck. For the first time she felt afraid. The young man stared at her face. Just when she thought that he would make a move on her, he finally made a move. He bent down. Shi Mengwan was shocked and instinctively covered her head with her hand. The young man picked up the plastic bags and bottles on the ground. Then, after rolling them into a ball, he threw them into the trash can at the side with great accuracy. After throwing them, he glanced at Shi Mengwan, turned around and continued to walk forward. Shi Mengwan stood up and followed behind him for some reason. After taking a few steps, the young man suddenly turned around and looked at her. Chapter 651. Shi Mengwan was shocked. This time she stubbornly looked at him. The youth took a step forward and raised his hand, pretending to hit her. Shi Mengwan shrunk her neck but didn't run back. The youth clenched his hand into a fist, then retracted it and continued forward. Shi Mengwan followed behind him. She looked at the youth and didn't know why she wasn't afraid of him at all. "Why did those people hit you?" There was silence. The youth directly ignored her. "You seem to be seriously injured. Do you want to see a doctor?" The youth's footsteps quickened, and Shi Mengwan had no choice but to quicken her footsteps. "Where are your parents? Do they not care about you? Where are you going now? Aren't you afraid that those people will come looking for you again?" "Shut up." The youth finally couldn't take it anymore. He turned around and glared at Shi Mengwan. "Don't follow me." Shi Mengwan bit her lip and followed behind the youth again as he continued to walk forward. The youth walked very fast. He made up his mind to get rid of Shi Mengwan. Shi Mengwan ran with him. She even thought that it was fortunate that the youth was injured. Otherwise she wouldn't have been able to catch up. Yes, the youth's leg seemed to be injured so he couldn't walk fast. He ran for a long time, but when he realized that he couldn't get rid of Shi Mengwan, he finally gave up. He didn't take another detour. Instead, he walked directly into an extremely small alley at the side. Then he found one of the doors with familiarity and pushed the door open. Shi Mengwan stood at the door for a long time. Seeing that the youth had no intention of closing the door, she followed him in. The house was very small. She could almost see the entire layout at a glance. There was a small living room with a room inside. On the right was the kitchen and the bathroom. There was nothing else. The living room was very small. There was an extremely shabby cloth sofa. The original color could no longer be seen. The coffee table in front of the sofa was also missing a corner. There was an open medicine box on it. The youth took out bandages and medicine from inside and treated his wound. The most serious part of his injury was on his hand. And with just one hand he couldn't apply good medicine to himself. Looking at the youth's overly clumsy movements, Shi Mengwan went forward and sat down beside him. She took the medicine from his hand. "Let me help you," she said. "You know how." "I won't." Shi Mengwan shook her head honestly. "However, I've seen the veterinarian near our house bandage the dog's wound." She felt the young man's face darken in an instant. Startled, she retracted her hand that was holding the medicine. "You're cursing me?" The youth was not old, but his entire body was filled with a vicious aura. Shi Mengwan had never seen such a person before. She shook her head quickly. The youth didn't say anything else. Shi Mengwan could finally start treating his wounds. She was clumsy. After all, she had never done anything like this before. The youth kept gritting his teeth as if he was enduring something. After more than half an hour, she finally treated all the wounds on the young man's body. The rest of the youngster's body was covered with superficial wounds. The more serious ones were on his feet and elbows. She finished bandaging the wound and found that it was very ugly. For a moment she looked a little ashamed. Fortunately, the young man didn't mind. After the young man's wounds were bandaged, he got up and walked to the kitchen. He looked around as if he was looking for something to eat. However, he found that the kitchen was empty. The young man's expression became more and more unsightly. Shi Mengwan seemed to know what he was thinking. Thinking of the scene of him eating bread in big mouthfuls, she looked at him very quietly. Are you still hungry? Do you want to eat? I'll buy it for you? The young man's sinister gaze fell on her again. Shi Mingwan shrunk her neck. She took out a few bills from her pocket. They were the only ones left after she bought the bus ticket. The young man looked at the money in her hand. This time he didn't stand on ceremony and took it. Stay here and don't run around. The young man's voice was changing, so his voice was actually a little unpleasant to hear. Coupled with his vicious face, ordinary people might feel afraid. However, Shi Mingwan didn't feel afraid. Strangely, she always believed that the young man wouldn't hurt her. After the young man left, she took a look at the house and tidied it up. Actually, there was nothing to tidy up. This place was too dilapidated and old. There was nothing at all. However, she was the eldest daughter of the family, so she was used to doing these things. Not long after she tidied up, the young man came back with 2 servings of fried rice noodles in his hands. Later, Shi Mingwan found out that the alley extended in all directions. There were many places to go and there were many places to sell supper. Although this fried rice noodle stall was just a roadside stall, the taste was very good and it was very cheap. Shi Mingwan had just eaten a piece of bread and a portion of rice noodles. She only ate half of it before she couldn't eat any more. When she put down her chopsticks, she clearly felt the young man's gaze fall on her, as if he was dissatisfied with her wasting food. Shi Mingwan's appetite wasn't big to begin with. Although she came from a small place, her family had developed well in the past few years, and their family's conditions weren't bad. Speaking of which, she really hadn't suffered much. The young man finished his portion of rice noodles. He silently took the remaining half of Shi Mingwan's portion and finished it as well. Shi Mingwan felt inexplicably embarrassed. The young man didn't seem to notice her situation. After finishing the rice noodles in a few bites, he didn't take a shower and went straight to the bed inside to lie down. Shi Mingwan sat on the small sofa outside, a little at a loss. She wanted to say, "You didn't even brush your teeth and wash your face. Aren't you dirty sleeping like this?" She sat there and waited for a long time. The young man seemed to have really fallen asleep. At this moment, Shi Mingwan stood up and walked to the bathroom with small steps. There was only a cup and a toothbrush there. Shi Mingwan had a slight obsession with cleanliness, so she couldn't do the behavior of using someone else's toothbrush. She could only rinse her mouth with water and wash her face with a handful of water. She cleaned herself up and looked at herself. There were no extra clothes and she had no money. The remaining dozens of yuan had been given to the young man just now. She felt that she was a little stupid. She should have left a few yuan behind. She didn't know what she was thinking just now. She gave him all the money in a moment of stupor. Now she didn't have a watch, so she couldn't tell the time. Shi Mingwan, who was sleepy, thought about it for a while. In the end, she curled up her feet on the broken sofa. She fell asleep just like that. Someone knocked on the car window and interrupted Shi Mingwan's memories. Shi Mingwan stopped the car. She realized that the traffic police were checking for drunk driving. She took out her driver's license and blew on it cooperatively. The traffic police glanced at Zhang Haoze, who was sitting next to the car seat. Finally, he waved his hand and signaled for Shi Mingwan to leave. Shi Mingwan's car drove away from the intersection and found that Zhang Haoze was actually awake. Neither of them spoke. Shi Mingwan realized that her apartment was not far ahead. She actually brought Zhang Haoze home without realizing it. Shi Mingwan's apartment was very close to her studio. This location wasn't cheap. Fortunately, the studio's income in the past few years had been good. After she made money in the studio, she borrowed some money from Su Qingsang to buy this small apartment. Although Su Qingsang was an illegitimate daughter, the Su family wasn't stingy when it came to money. She had her own apartment a long time ago, and Su Qinghui gave her pocket money every year. When she knew that Shi Mingwan wanted to buy a house, Su Qingsang was quite generous and lent her all her money. Shi Mingwan had been working hard to draw pictures these few years and paid back the money she owed Su Qingsang. She also saved some money. 2 rooms and 1 living room. Although it was small, it had all the necessary facilities. Although it couldn't compare to the Su family's mansion, it was still bought by her own hands. One of the 2 rooms was used as the master bedroom, and the other was used as a study and design room. When she was inspired, she must have a set of drawing tools in front of her. The living room wasn't big, but there was a large balcony. From here, she could see the landmarks of Lin City in the distance, as well as the large green area under the community. Overall, Shi Mingwan was very satisfied with her own state. She was still young, but she had her own studio, a house, and a car. Shi Mingwan entered the door silently. Instead of greeting Jean Hauser, she went to the living room cabinet and took out the medicine box. Jean Hauser stood in the living room, as if he was looking at the environment in front of him. Shi Mingwan glanced at him and sat down on the sofa. Jean Hauser took a few steps forward and sat down as well. The house was warm-toned and very cozy. The sofa in the corner wasn't big, but it was very comfortable to sit on. Shi Mingwan opened the medicine box, glanced at Jean Hauser, and motioned for him to take out his hand. He was wearing a light-colored shirt today. The blood was stained on the shirt and had already stuck to the flesh. Shi Mingwan's expression didn't look too good. Everything in front of her was developing in a strange direction. For a moment, she thought that the person in front of her was her dear brother. She even suggested to send him to the hospital, but in the end, she brought this man home. She skillfully cut open the man's sleeve and looked at the wound on it. Fortunately, it wasn't very serious. If he needed stitches, he would really have to go to the hospital. Her movements were very skilled. It was obvious that she had specially practiced it. Speaking of which, could her skills be like this? It was really because she had bandaged her dear brother's wounds too many times. She thought of that unruly youth again. She knew him from the time he was beaten up. After that, he would always fight with others from time to time and get injured from time to time. From the beginning she was clumsy, but later on she skillfully treated all kinds of wounds for him. Realizing that she had associated Jean Hauser with her dear brother again, Shi Mingwan's expression didn't look too good. They weren't the same person, not the same person. She kept reminding herself to keep herself awake. Her movements were very fast, and the wound on Jean Hauser's hand was quickly bandaged. She looked at Jean Hauser's face again. The corners of his face were sharp, and his wheat-colored skin was smooth and tight. It seemed that his fighting skills had also improved. After all, every time he was beaten in the past, there would be injuries on his face. She was looking at Jean Hauser, and Jean Hauser was also looking at her. He seemed to be able to tell that Shi Mingwan was a little absent-minded. Chapter 652. Shi Mingwan didn't notice Jean Hauser's gaze. Her thoughts were a little adrift. For so many years she had been searching and searching. At first he was filled with hope, but later he felt that his hope was getting slimmer and slimmer. She didn't forget her dear brother, but she kept him in the depths of her heart. She would not easily recall it, otherwise she would feel very uncomfortable. But ever since she met Jean Hauser, she had been reminiscing about the past more and more. She didn't like it very much. The more she recalled, the more it reminded her that she and dear brother might not be fated to be together. Just like today, she had already regarded Jean Hauser and her dear brother as two different people, but she saw this side of Jean Hauser. For a moment, she was in a trance, as if she had returned to more than 10 years ago. He was the same, always arguing with others, always fighting with others. She could not help thinking of them as one person. It was too similar. Not only her looks, but also, suddenly, an enlarged face appeared in front of him. The malicious eyes that were no different from those in her memory stared at her. Shi Mingwan was startled and took a step back. Behind her was the sofa, and her back touched the back of it. Jean Hauser's body leaned over and Shi Mingwan gulped. "Mr. Jean, the wound has been bandaged. You can go now." Jean Hauser pursed his lips slightly and looked at the nervousness on Shi Mingwan's face. He stretched his hands forward and placed them on her sides. "Where are you going?" Shi Mingwan blinked. "Where to?" "Of course it was to leave this place. Mr. Jean, this is my home." "I know this is your home. When you brought a strange man home, didn't you think about the consequences?" Seeing that Jean Hauser's face was getting closer and closer, Shi Mingwan pressed hard against his chest. "Mr. Jean. Sorry for the misunderstanding. She couldn't say the rest of her words. She just thought of him as her dear brother. She just replaced the past memories in front of her. However, the man in front of her did not know her and did not admit that he was her big brother. In short, it's all a misunderstanding. It's getting late and I still need to rest. Please go ahead." Jean Hauser's body blocked her way. Shi Mingwan didn't move, nor did she escape. She didn't want what happened in the elevator to happen again. "Mr. Jean, can you make way?" Jean Hauser stared at Shi Mingwan's face for a long time, and finally stood up very slowly. Shi Mingwan didn't relax because he stood up. The other party was too tall. She was nearly 1.7 meters tall, and her sitting posture only made the other party look even taller. She didn't know that when her eyes stared at Jean Hauser's face with vigilance, there was an infinite flirtatious look in her eyes. The corners of her eyes were slightly raised, and there was a seductive air about her. But she was completely unaware of her own charms. Jean Hauser stood there, not in a hurry to leave, nor was he in a hurry to move. Shi Mingwan was a little nervous. She gulped. His eyes were filled with anticipation. Zhang Hao's eyes darkened at his eagerness to leave. Not only did he not leave, but he also leaned down. Shi Mingwan felt more and more nervous and leaned back. It was almost a silent invitation. Zhang Hao looked at her half-open lips and stopped less than a centimeter away from her lips. Breathing hot, Shi Mingwan stared at the enlarged face in front of her and felt inexplicably thirsty. She subconsciously pursed her lips. Zhang Hao's face leaned closer, almost touching hers. "Miss Shi." Zhang Hao's voice sounded a little low. "If you don't intend to let a man do anything to you, don't casually bring a man home, and don't casually put on such a seductive posture." After saying this, Zhang Hao got up and left. The sound of the door closing brought Shi Mingwan back to her senses from the other party's words. After she came back to her senses, she was filled with anger. What did this Zhang Hao mean? What did he mean by casually bringing someone home? And what did he mean by casually putting on a seductive posture? Shi Mingwan wanted to curse, but the person who could make her curse had already left. She wanted to curse, but she didn't know where to start. Gritting her teeth, Shi Mingwan couldn't suppress her anger no matter what. She told herself that if she still cared about Zhang Hao next time, she would be a pig. She was so angry. When Zhang Hao entered the door, he found that the lights in the hall were shining. Chen Feifei sat on the sofa, and her expression wasn't particularly good. She kept a straight face until Zhang Hao entered the door. Chen Feifei's expression finally looked better. She stood up as if she was flying and quickly pounced in front of Zhang Hao. "Brother Hao, you're back." Chen Feifei's eyes were a little red. When she walked in front of Zhang Hao, she had already cleaned up the expression on her face. When he entered the door, he put on his suit jacket, and the wound on his hand was covered up. Chen Feifei didn't notice that when she pounced on him, she touched his wound. Zhang Hao's brows furrowed imperceptibly. He resisted the urge to pull Chen Feifei's hand away. "It's so late. Why aren't you sleeping yet?" "You still know that it's so late?" Chen Feifei pouted. "It's so late and you still haven't come back. Don't you know that I'll be worried? Go to sleep." Zhang Hao's voice was considered gentle, but he didn't coax her like before. Chen Feifei was a little unhappy. "Brother Hao, where did you go?" "Nowhere. I'm just working overtime at the company." "I must tell Dad not to give you so much work. Look at you, you don't even have time to accompany me. Don't mess around." Zhang Hao's voice was a little serious. "Work is work, not play. If you don't want to say it, then I won't say it." Chen Feifei became more and more unhappy. "But you're always busy. You used to be willing to accompany me, but recently, you've been spending less and less time with me." Her tone was full of complaints. Zhang Hao looked at her, and his expression softened. "I'll accompany you after I'm done with my work." "You said it." Chen Feifei hooked his arm. "Don't lie to me. If you stand me up, I'll tell Dad." "What are you going to tell me?" The sudden voice made the two of them look at the stairs together. Qin Yongchang had come down at some point and looked at the two of them holding hands. "Dad." When Chen Feifei saw her father, she quickly let go of her hand and ran towards Qin Yongchang. "Why aren't you sleeping yet?" "My precious daughter isn't sleeping. How can I sleep?" Qin Yongchang patted Chen Feifei's hand. "What's wrong? You haven't said what you want to tell me yet. Let me tell you, give Brother Hao less work. Look, he's so busy that he doesn't have time to accompany me." "Really?" Qin Yongchang glanced at Zhang Hao, then looked at Chen Feifei. "You're not young anymore. Don't be too willful. Hao is someone who wants to do great things. How can he accompany you every day?" "I don't care. I just want Brother Hao to accompany me." It was rare for Chen Feifei to be willful. Her tone was full of coquettishness. Qin Yongchang couldn't do anything about this daughter. Good. But it's getting late now, you should go to sleep." "Then?" Chen Feifei looked at Zhang Hao, wanting him to send her back to her room. "Go to sleep first. I have something to discuss with Hao." "Got it." Chen Feifei pouted, her face full of unhappiness. "Dad hates it the most. It's not enough for Brother Hao to help you during the day, but at night, you still want to snatch him from me." "Feifei," Qin Yongchang called her name. Chen Feifei was unhappy. She stomped her feet and went upstairs. A grown girl really can't be kept at home. Qin Yongchang looked at his daughter, glanced at Zhang Hao, and walked towards the study. Zhang Hao followed behind him silently. The study was on the first floor. Qin Yongchang entered the door and gestured for Zhang Hao to sit down. He didn't sit down but stood opposite the desk. "It's been so many years, but you're still so polite. Qin Yongchang seemed to be lamenting. Zhang Haoze didn't respond, and he didn't need his response. There haven't been many things happening in the company recently. You came back so late today. Is there something wrong? There was a hint of inquiry in Qin Yongchang's eyes. It's nothing big. Zhang Haoze's voice was very indifferent. It's just a small matter. I've already taken care of it. I believe you know what to do. Qin Yongchang didn't continue this topic but changed the topic. That year Feifei saved you and brought you back. It's been more than 10 years now. You know how Feifei feels about you. This child has been stubborn since she was young. She has decided on you, and as her father, I can't do anything about it. You're not young anymore. It's time to think about starting a family. Don't you think so? Zhang Haoze was silent and didn't respond. The last time Feifei was hospitalized, you also promised me that you would marry her. Although her body is better now, she still has to be carefully nurtured. To be honest, I don't feel at ease handing her over to someone else. After so many years, I've seen your character. Haoze, I should be able to trust you, right? Zhang Haoze pursed his lips slightly and finally nodded gently. I promised you that I would take care of her. Okay. It's getting late. You should go and rest first. You don't have to go to work tomorrow. Accompany Feifei. Zhang Haoze didn't refute. He nodded slightly and turned to leave. After returning to his room, Zhang Haoze took off his suit jacket. There were still bloodstains on the shirt inside. He took it off and threw it into the trash can. His gaze was a little gloomy as he looked at the bandaged wound. Thinking of Qin Yongchang's words just now, he took out his phone. He pressed a set of numbers from memory. After the call was connected, he only said one sentence, I agree to what you said last time. After hanging up the phone, Zhang Haoze deleted the call record. He made 2 more calls. Each time he only said a few words and deleted the call record. After putting down the phone, he laid down on the bed. His tightly closed eyes covered up all his emotions. Shi Mingwan hung up the phone, but she still couldn't hide the shock in her heart. She had long known that Su Qingsang was the illegitimate daughter of the Su family. However, she didn't expect that Su Qingsang's mother would come knocking on her door one day. This was really amazing. Today, Su Qingsang called to ask her to go to dinner and meet Su Qingsang's mother. Shi Mingwan later met Xiang Kaiping, an auntie who looked quite kind and cute. Shi Mingwan liked her very much. When she saw her, she would think of her mother. Thinking of her mother, Shi Mingwan remembered that during the Mid-Autumn Festival, she was busy drawing and only stayed home for 2 days before returning to Lin City. Later, her mother called and her words were full of disappointment. Perhaps she should choose a day to go back again. It was winter in Lin City, and the weather slowly turned cold. That day was designer Tong Yan's birthday. After Song Seeking Studio got on track in the 2nd year, Shi Mingwan began to be busy alone. She hired 2 designers, one was Zhou Xinglei and the other was Tong Yan. The 2 designers were a man and a woman. Neither of them was very experienced, but the design concept was very compatible with her. Tong Yan was 1 year younger than her, and today was her birthday. She didn't have a boyfriend yet, so in the past few years she had been treating everyone to dinner to celebrate her birthday. At first, because Tong Yan didn't have a boyfriend, Shi Mingwan, as the boss, treated her to dinner to celebrate her birthday. Later, she simply turned the birthdays of the studio's staff into a gathering day. When it was time to get off work, Shi Mingwan brought her assistant Xiao Ji, secretary Xiao Qiu, and design assistant Shang Ji into her car. The other design assistant, Cheng Jiang, followed Tong Yan into Zhou Xinglei's car. The 7 of them went to Chaoan Courtyard together. In the past, Shi Mingwan didn't spend so much money, but since Su Qingsang got married, Hua Jinyao often gave her all kinds of expense cards. In the past, Su Qingsang foolishly thought that their company had good benefits. Only now did she know that it wasn't good benefits. It was simply President Hua using all kinds of excuses to please his wife. Especially since Hua Jinyao's identity was known in Lin City, there were too many people who wanted to please Hua Jinyao. Many of the membership cards in her hands were given by Su Qingsang. It had to be said that the title of Mrs. Hua was very useful. Shi Mingwan brought her 6 employees into Chaoan Courtyard. The chefs here could cook specialties from all over the country. Although Shi Mingwan was from the south, her taste was heavy and she liked spicy food. She ordered 2 spicy dishes and left the rest to Tong Yan, the birthday girl. Halfway through the meal, Shi Mingwan received a call. She asked Xiao Qiu to take care of them while she went outside to get the cake. Yes. As a good boss, ordering a cake for her employees was also one of her considerate actions. The cake Shi Mingwan ordered was delivered to the hall of Chaoan Courtyard. She took the cake and was about to walk into the private room when she saw Jean House's figure from the corner of her eye. She couldn't help but stop in her tracks. It had been almost a month since she last saw Jean House. During this month she tried her best not to think of Jean House and that man. She kept hypnotizing herself and telling herself that that man was no longer her dear brother. He was a hooligan, a bastard. He liked to mock her and look down on her. However, she didn't expect to see Jean House again when she was about to succeed. He was standing in the corridor with a woman standing beside him. That woman wasn't Chen Feifei but someone else. When Shi Mingwan was about to enter the private room, she saw the woman fall into Jean House's arms, and Jean House's arms were around her waist. That scene made Shi Mingwan frown. She couldn't tell what she was feeling. Dear brother could probably only become a shadow in her memory. She turned around and entered her private room without looking back. What she didn't see was that after she left, Jean House's hand had already left the woman's hand. I'm really sorry, President Jean. Ling Shui steadied herself and slowly removed her hand from Jean House's hand. The heels were too high and I couldn't stand firm. I almost bumped into President Jean. It's okay. Jean House was expressionless. Your father is still waiting for us in the private room. Miss Ling, please. President Jean, you actually don't have to be so polite. Ling Shui nodded at Jean House. Speaking of which, I'm about the same as President Jean. You Miss Ling come and go like this. Isn't that too polite? Why don't you call me by my name Ling Shui? Ling Shui was pretty good looking. She was also very confident in her family background and appearance. At this moment her gaze at Jean House was naked and direct. She almost said it out loud, I'm interested in you as a man. Jean House's expression didn't change. He took 2 steps forward and opened the door of the private room. Miss Ling, please. Ling Shui took a deep look at Jean House and slowly entered the door. Ling Shui's father was the chairman of a company that worked with the Chen family. Recently, the 2 companies were discussing a cooperation project. Chen Yongchang's health hadn't been good these few days, so he handed this matter to Jean House. Today was the day to sign the contract. Originally, after the contract was signed it would be over. However, the other party was a business partner after all. Chen Yongchang asked Jean House to do his part and treat the other party to a meal. The place was set at Chaoan Courtyard. Jean House brought his secretary Lu Xen over. And Chairman Ling brought his daughter Ling Shui. It was inevitable that they would have to drink at the dinner table. Jean House's alcohol tolerance wasn't bad. This was also the reason why Chen Yongchang was at ease to let him come out to socialize. Lu Xen tried to block it, but Jean House still had to drink the wine from Chairman Ling. After 3 rounds of drinking, Chairman Ling looked drunk. Brother Jean, I really admire you. You're so young but you're so capable. Brother Yongchang is really lucky to have a talent like you. Chairman Ling, you're too polite. Jean House didn't take such praise seriously. There wasn't much pride on his face. Chairman Ling was also someone who had been in the business world for many years. He really admired Jean House, who didn't show his emotions and strive to be perfect in everything he did. He envied Chen Yongchang's good luck and couldn't help but look at Ling Shui again. Come Shui. Let me toast Brother Jean again. Ling Shui picked up her wine glass and toasted Jean House. President Jean. President Jean, let me toast you. Jean House didn't decline. He picked it up and drank. Ling Shui smiled. She glanced at Chairman Ling. Dad, I've already toasted you. Now it's your turn. Good, good, good. Chairman Ling raised his wine glass. Brother Jean, let me toast you. I wish us a happy cooperation. Happy cooperation. Jean House drank it in one gulp again. Lu Xen wanted to stop him but he couldn't. Jean House drank a lot. When he was about to leave, Chairman Ling stood up. Brother Jean, I drank a little too much today. I drank a little too much today. Do you mind letting your secretary send me home? I don't mind. Lu Xen didn't drink much today. Jean House called him over so that he could send Chairman Ling and his daughter home after he got drunk. He watched as Chairman Ling left with Lu Xen. Jean House stood up and planned to leave as well. However, the door of the private room was opened again. This time Ling Shui came in. President Jean, why aren't you leaving yet? Miss Ling? I dropped something. Come up and look for it. As Ling Shui spoke, she started to look for it in her original seat. Jean House wasn't in a hurry to leave out of politeness. What are you looking for, Miss Ling? A necklace. Ling Shui pointed at her neck. I was wearing it just now. I don't know why it's gone now. Jean House frowned slightly. Just as he was about to say goodbye, Ling Shui raised her head and looked at him. President Jean, do you mind helping me look for it? I don't mind. At this time, Jean Hausa couldn't refuse. He was still working in Qin Yongchang's company, and the person in front of him was still his collaborator. He bent down and helped Ling Shui look for her necklace. The table in the private room was very big, and Ling Shui was beside Jean Hausa. She was wearing a V-neck dress today. When she bent down, Jean Hausa could see the scenery when she lowered her head. He turned his face away without any fluctuation, but Ling Shui exclaimed at this moment. Here. As she spoke, she reached out her hand in his direction. As the two of them were squatting, Jean Hausa didn't notice and was actually knocked to the ground by Ling Shui's suddenly approaching body. Ling Shui's hand reached behind Jean Hausa. This way she was almost sticking to Jean Hausa's body. I'm sorry, President Jean. Ling Shui picked up the necklace. Jean Hausa didn't say anything and waited for her to leave his arms. At this moment, Ling Shui took the opportunity to press on his body and pressed her hands against his chest. President Jean. How should I thank you for helping me find the necklace? You're welcome. Miss Ling, can you get up first? Ling Shui didn't say anything. She lowered her head and was about to kiss Jean Hausa's lips. Jean Hausa avoided her, and Ling Shui's kiss landed on Jean Hausa's face. Jean Hausa frowned. Just as he was about to push Ling Shui away, he suddenly realized that something was wrong with his body. Hot. He felt the heat coming from little Yu Fu, and the waves of heat surged down. He suddenly looked at Ling Shui, his gaze sharp and cold like a knife. President Jean, you're so handsome. She had seen many handsome men, but she liked people like Jean Hausa. He was abstinent, cold, and looked like he was 1,000 miles away. She liked this kind of man and she liked this kind of style. She couldn't help but want to have a closer relationship with Jean Hausa. Even if she couldn't marry him or be with him, it didn't matter. She only needed a one-night marriage. To her, having such a top-notch man was a bargain. Unfortunately, when they were talking about cooperation, no matter how she hinted, Jean Hausa didn't seem to understand. Helpless, she could only think of another way. Today was the day the two families signed the contract. When she knew that Jean Hausa had arranged a meal, she made an appointment with him in Chaowen Courtyard. Chapter 653. She had seen Qin Feifei before. She was a sickly person. She heard that she had heart disease and looked weak. She hated women like that the most. She felt that they were pretentious and fake. She was an ambitious woman. And Ling Shui never hid her ambition. President Jean, I've admired you since the first time I saw you. As she spoke, she reached into Jean Hausa's clothes. Even if only a small part of his wheat-colored chest was exposed, it was enough to make her imagination run wild. Jean Hausa's breathing became heavier. He finally understood that this woman had added something to the wine he had just drunk. President Jean. Ling Shui saw his face turn red. She leaned down, pressed her slender hand on his chest and unbuttoned one of his buttons. I really admire you. I'm very willing to have a chance to communicate with you further. As she spoke, she had already unbuttoned the second button of his shirt. Jean Hausa held her hand at this moment. Ling Shui's eyes widened, but Jean Hausa pushed her away and stood up. His movements were too fast, so fast that Ling Shui didn't have time to stop him. You? She only said one word before she saw Jean Hausa's face turn red and he took 2 steps back. He looked down at Ling Shui's face. His breathing was a little heavy, but it couldn't hide the coldness in his eyes. I appreciate Miss Ling's good intentions. I'll remember Miss Ling's appreciation for me. I still have something to do, so I'll leave first. His voice was a little low and a little hoarse. In fact, the medicine that Ling Shui had given him made his body heat up and he felt very uncomfortable. He used his greatest willpower to suppress the heat in his body. He quickly left the private room. After a short moment of surprise, Ling Shui quickly reacted. She stood up and wanted to chase after Jean Hausa. However, she realized that Jean Hausa could no longer be seen in the corridor outside. She stomped her feet in hatred. She knew that if she missed this opportunity today, she wouldn't have it again. She was angry, but there was nothing she could do. Now she could only wait for the next chance to come again. After Shi Mingwan sent Tong Yen and the others away, she walked in the direction of her car. She didn't drink. She had always followed the habit of not drinking when driving and not driving when drinking. Tong Yen and the others said that they were going to karaoke, but she wasn't interested. Although he was easy to talk to, he was still the boss. With her around, Tong Yen and the others would probably feel uncomfortable. She might as well promise them that she would pay for the expenses, but she wouldn't be going. After leaving Chaowen Courtyard, Shi Mingwan walked towards her car. It was night time in Chowan Courtyard, and the parking area was a little dark. Passing through the greenery on both sides, the parking space around the corner was hers. However, his body was suddenly pulled into the bushes. The sudden change gave Shi Mengwan a fright. Her first reaction was to struggle, but as her body moved closer to him, she smelled the familiar scent of mint. The light was dim, but she could see clearly. The person in front of him was Zhang Haoze. His reddened eyes in the dark, his slightly heavy breathing, and his hand that was tightly wrapped around her waist. You. She only had time to say the word you before she felt a warm sensation on her lips. What followed was an almost suffocating plunder. He was like a leopard that had bitten its prey. Once it was bitten, it refused to let go. Kiss fierce. Indulgence. It was as if it wanted to swallow her whole. This was Shi Mengwan's first kiss. She had never been kissed like this before. Or perhaps she had. When she was kissed, her consciousness became a little erratic. She remembered that this couldn't be considered her first kiss. Her first kiss was lost when she was 12 years old. The strength on her lips increased again. She felt pain and raised her foot to kick the other party's crotch. However, she neglected her current position. She was pulled over by the man, and her body was half nestled against his chest. She was pressed into his arms and kissed wantonly. The moment she raised her foot, her body lost balance and she got closer to him. It was like a branch that was entangled by a vine. They were intertwined. There was me and you and me. They couldn't tell each other apart. Shi Mengwan felt her body being hugged by him. She took a step back and leaned against the tree trunk beside her. She wasn't wearing thick clothes, and the cold and hard tree trunk made her feel uncomfortable. She struggled again. Just as the other party's hand was about to reach for the hem of her clothes, she couldn't help but raise her hand and slap the other party's face. She was a little angry but more so resentful. What did he take her for? The humiliation from before. Today it was a real bullying. She had just seen him cuddling with a woman, and now he was pestering her again. In the end he had changed. He was no longer the person she remembered. Or could it be that he had just returned to his true nature, that he had always been a casual person? No matter which one it was, she didn't want to continue. The pa sound was especially clear in the night. The man's movements stopped for a moment. She was carried into the man's arms. The man's chin was pressed against the pit of her neck, and his breathing was heavier than before. Shi Mengwan smelled the smell of alcohol. She tried to push the other party. Strangely, this time she actually succeeded. After pushing the other party away, she quickly ran to her car. The car door opened twice. She didn't know what she was nervous about. When she got into the car, Shi Mengwan realized that someone was sitting in the front passenger seat. Zhang Haoze. His face was abnormally red. His breathing was heavy and the smell of alcohol was strong. He seemed to be drunk. Shi Mengwan leaned her body towards the car door and stared at Zhang Haoze with a face full of vigilance. Mr. Zhang? Zhang Haoze's voice was low and hoarse. He seemed to have seen Ling Shui come out. He didn't want her to see him in Shi Mengwan's car. President Zhang? I said drive. Shi Mengwan gritted her teeth, stepped on the accelerator for the last time and quickly left. The moment her car drove away, Ling Shui arrived at the parking lot and looked at Zhang Haoze's car, which was still parked there. Zhang Haoze hadn't left yet? That made sense. He drank alcohol and was drugged. The alcohol had triggered the drug, so it wouldn't be easy to get rid of it. He should still be in the villa. With this thought, Ling Shui went back to look for Zhang Haoze. Shi Mengwan stopped the car halfway. She wanted Zhang Haoze to get lost. She wanted to leave her car, but Zhang Haoze didn't look right. His eyes were tightly shut, and he seemed to be very uncomfortable. Shi Mengwan's brows furrowed tightly. President Zhang? Mr. Zhang? Zhang Haoze seemed to have heard her. He opened his eyes and glanced at her. Where's your house? Tell me the address. I'll send you back. The other party was her dear brother, the person she had always cared about and wanted to find. She didn't want to really leave him on the road. Zhang Haoze didn't answer her question. Instead he closed his eyes. Mr. Zhang? Zhang Haoze? Shi Mengwan called out a few more times, but she didn't get a response. Helpless, she could only drive the car back to her home. When the car was parked, Shi Mengwan got out of the car first. She originally wanted to just leave Zhang Haoze here. After thinking about it, she went around and opened the car door. Mr. Zhang? Zhang Haoze didn't move. Shi Mengwan gritted her teeth. Mr. Zhang, can you get out of the car by yourself? Zhang Haoze's eyes seemed to move. Shi Mengwan took a deep breath and bent down to look at him. Mr. Zhang, can you hear me? Zhang Haoze finally reacted. He opened his eyes. Shi Mingwan was shocked by his gaze. His eyes seemed to be even redder than before. Are you okay? Jean Hausa suddenly reached out and placed his hand on her shoulder. She almost went limp, but he got out of the car. Shi Mingwan instinctively supported his body. Most of his weight was on her. He was very heavy and Shi Mingwan almost couldn't support him. Being so close to him, his body was full of the smell of alcohol, mixed with the faint smell of mint. Shi Mingwan closed the car door and looked up at him. Mr. Jean, can you stand steadily? Jean Hausa narrowed his eyes and didn't say anything. However, he almost carried her into the apartment. Shi Mingwan followed him helplessly and brought him upstairs. As soon as they entered, Shi Mingwan threw him on the sofa. During the short journey just now, she was covered in sweat. Jean Hausa lay on the sofa and didn't move. His face was even redder than before. There was a flash of worry in Shi Mingwan's eyes. But it was only for a moment. Soon she didn't plan to care about Jean Hausa anymore. No matter how worried she was, it was useless. He had a fiancée and had forgotten about her. She turned around and went back to her room to change her clothes. She planned to take a shower and sleep. Today's torment was enough. After returning to her room, Shi Mingwan had just found her pajamas and took off her top. The door to the room was suddenly opened and she was shocked. Before she could turn around, her body was already hugged by Jean Hausa. In front of her was the bed. Without thinking, he directly pressed her down on the bed. Mr. Jean? Her lips were blocked. It was the same domineering and predatory kiss as before. This time she didn't even have a place to escape. Behind her was the bed. In front of her was his strong chest. Shi Mingwan struggled, but she wasn't Jean Hausa's match at all. Woo-woo. Jean Hausa, let go of me. But she couldn't make a sound. Other than the sound of clothes rubbing against each other, there was only the sound of cloth rubbing against each other. She was anxious. Jean Hausa didn't speak in the car just now because he had been suppressing the drug in his body. But in this environment, the entire room was filled with Shi Mingwan's faint aura. The drug seemed to be unable to be suppressed anymore. He kissed Shi Mingwan as if he was biting her. Shi Mingwan was in pain. The moment Jean Hausa's lips left her chin, she used all her strength to push him away. She quickly got up and wanted to run to the other side. But before she could run away, Jean Hausa pounced on her again. Shi Mingwan was anxious. She pressed her hands against his chest with all her might, forcing him to see her clearly. Jean Hausa? Jean Hausa, look clearly. Who am I? I'm Shi Mingwan, not Qin Feifei. Look clearly. Jean Hausa's movements paused for a moment. Shi Mingwan took the opportunity to push his body away again. Jean Hausa, you have a girlfriend. Please calm down. She didn't know if he could listen to her and she didn't know how much he could listen to, but she had to say it. Jean Hausa's body froze there and he kept panting heavily. His eyes were red and he seemed to be trying his best to control himself. Shi Mingwan saw that his hands were tightly clenched into fists, and his body looked very stiff. A trace of unconcealable worry flashed across her eyes. Jean Hausa. Jean Hausa glanced at her and didn't say anything. He stood up as if he was about to leave. However, his footsteps staggered at this moment and he was about to fall. Shi Mingwan went forward to support him without thinking. Jean Hausa. Was he okay? Shi Mingwan finally realized that something was wrong with Jean Hausa. Not only was he drunk, but his skin was also boiling hot. Even through a layer of shirt, she could feel the heat of his skin. You're sick. Jean Hausa stared at Shi Mingwan's red lips that were open and closed and pushed her away forcefully. Jean Hausa? Shi Mingwan took 2 steps back. Thinking of Jean Hausa's actions just now, she seemed to understand something. Do you want to wash your face? She went forward to support Jean Hausa. This time he didn't push her away. He hugged her tightly and kept rubbing against her body. Shi Mingwan half supported and half dragged him towards the bathroom. Her house wasn't big. She was also a person who didn't care about anything when she was busy. There was only a shower in the bathroom but no bathtub. She helped Jean Hausa stand under the shower. Do you want to take a cold shower? She read the book as if it would be better this way. Although she didn't know if it was true. As she spoke, Jean Hausa had already turned on the water. Shi Mingwan was caught off guard and was drenched. She had always cherished her body. She never took a cold shower or drank cold water. Suddenly being drenched like this, she couldn't stay any longer. She let go of Jean Hausa and quickly left. The sound of water behind her continued, but she didn't want to care anymore. When she returned to her room, she took her pajamas and hurried to another guest bathroom to take a shower. At this time she had to be glad that she didn't connect the guest bathroom to the main bathroom and turn it into a big bathroom. When she came out, she found that the sound of water in the bathroom was still there. She frowned slightly. She wanted to go in and take a look, but she was afraid that Jean House's symptoms were still there. After thinking about it, she decided not to care anymore. But this was her room, and the sound of water coming from the bathroom made it impossible for her to fall asleep. She turned around and went to the study. When she sat down, she realized that she wasn't in the mood to draw. She thought of her first kiss. When she was 12 years old, she lost her first kiss. At that time, she had been living with her dear brother for almost half a year. Dear brother was very good to her and took care of her. But he often had a cold face. No, he seemed to have a cold face to everyone. Even if he cared about her, he often said it with a cold face. That time, not long after the Spring Festival, it was the Lantern Festival. Southerners had to eat glutinous rice balls during the Lantern Festival. She used to live in the countryside, so these habits were well preserved. On the day before the Lantern Festival, she casually said that tomorrow was the Lantern Festival and she wanted to eat glutinous rice balls. The next day, dear brother really brought glutinous rice balls back. She was overjoyed, but that glutinous rice ball was so small. Is this glutinous rice ball? Why is it so small? She looked at the 2 bowls of glutinous rice balls and then at dear brother. Dear brother nodded heavily and told her that this was glutinous rice ball. It was fine if she ate it, but it was fine if she didn't. Each place had its own customs. Shi Mingwan thought that perhaps in Lin City, glutinous rice balls were so small. She didn't know that dear brother didn't buy any glutinous rice balls at all, but fermented rice balls. How old was she at that time? She was 12 years old. The little bit of alcohol in it was enough to make her drunk. Moreover, the one that dear brother bought had a strong smell of alcohol. However, the 2 children didn't notice it at that time. Dear brother, you're so good looking. He was the best-looking person she had ever seen. Dear brother also ate that and his face was a little red. The youth had never drunk alcohol before, and the alcohol in it was enough to make him a little drunk. He looked at the girl in front of him. The 12-year-old girl had already begun to develop. In half a year, her body had grown a little taller. Her figure was slender and her facial features were beautiful. Especially those eyes, which seemed to be able to speak. The youth suddenly felt a little hot. After the first month, he was already 16 years old. He was a big boy. You're very beautiful too. The voice of the youth, who was approaching the end of his voice change period, wasn't as unpleasant to hear as it was at the beginning. Shi Mingwan blinked and looked at dear brother. No, you're even better looking. As she spoke, she sat beside the youth. Her small hand gently caressed the youth's facial features. Dear brother, your eyebrows are beautiful, your nose is beautiful, your eyes are beautiful, and your face is beautiful. And her hand landed on his lips. She blinked and her voice was a little drunk. Your mouth is also beautiful. The youth felt even hotter than before. The girl in front of him had bright eyes, white teeth, and skin like porcelain. He caught her hand and turned it to stroke her face. Wanwan is also beautiful. Her eyes are beautiful, her face is beautiful, and her mouth is also beautiful. He was imitating her words. Shi Mingwan blinked and suddenly smiled. You missed my nose. Is my nose not beautiful? The youth was very willing to coax her. Moreover, this was the truth. My Wanwan is beautiful in every way. Shi Mingwan smiled. Her smile made the small and shabby room seem to have suddenly become bright. The youth looked at Shi Mingwan's bright red lips in front of him. He couldn't help but lean over and gently kiss her lips. Their eyes met. The youth looked at the girl's clear eyes and the girl looked at the youth's raised eyebrows. The youth suddenly realized what he had done and quickly retreated. The tips of his ears were dyed red without a trace. Half of it was because he was shy and the other half was because he blamed himself. What was he doing just now? He actually kissed her. She was only 12 years old. Even after the new year, she would only be 13 years old. The girl didn't realize that she had been taken advantage of. She leaned over and held the youth's face. Dear brother, your mouth is so sweet. He had just eaten the wine-fermented meatballs, so his lips naturally had the taste of the wine-fermented meatballs. She wanted to eat it again, so she leaned over and took the initiative to press her lips against the youth's. It was a young and clumsy kiss. It was both the youth and the girl's first time. After the kiss, the girl felt satisfied. Under the influence of alcohol, she went back to her room and fell into a deep sleep. She didn't know that because of her kiss, the youth had an extremely shameful and absurd dream at night. She also didn't know that the youth, who had always been lazy, woke up early the next morning and hurriedly washed his clothes. He even changed the bed sheets. Shi Mingwan only knew that when she woke up the next day she still remembered the kiss from yesterday. She blushed a little but she felt happy. That person was her dear brother. From that moment on, a seed was planted in the girl's extremely secretive thoughts. She liked her dear brother, so she naturally didn't hate this kiss. But from the next day her dear brother started to avoid her. He would avoid her sight, avoid her contact, and Shi Mingwan thought that her dear brother hated her and felt that she was frivolous. Yes, which good girl would run away from home at the age of 12 or 13? What kind of good girl would live with a half-grown boy? And which good girl would take the initiative to kiss a boy? All the education she had received since she was young told her that these things were wrong and wrong. She blamed herself, felt guilty and felt ashamed. She felt that she had done something wrong. She shouldn't have taken the initiative to kiss her dear brother. Her dear brother probably hated her too. For those few days she was extremely sad. In the end she couldn't help but wake up early one day when the youth was about to go out and block the youth's path. Bang! She seemed to hear something coming from the bathroom next door. Shi Mingwan's thoughts were pulled back by that sound. She hurriedly got up and returned to her room. She hesitated for a moment. Listening to the sound of water inside, she resolutely went in. The showerhead had fallen off at some point. John Hauser sat on the ground. His clothes were messy and all of them had been torn off by him. His body was abnormally red. His breathing was so heavy that she could easily hear it. She could even see John Hauser's tent that was set up high. He seemed to be very uncomfortable. He was constantly fighting with himself, but he didn't seem to succeed. The scene in front of her was really too special. Shi Mingwan's face was a little red, but she was more worried. She went forward and looked at John Hauser with obvious concern. John Hauser? John Hauser? She first turned off the showerhead that was still spraying water at the wall. She bent down to help John Hauser up. John Hauser leaned against the wall with his eyes half closed. When he heard Shi Mingwan's voice, he opened his eyes. Shi Mingwan happened to bend down at this moment. She was shocked when she met John Hauser's eyes. It was a pair of wolf-like eyes. Fierce, violent, sinister and deep. Shi Mingwan's body instinctively retreated, but it was already too late. John Hauser pulled her into his arms and kissed her accurately. Shi Mingwan didn't even have time to let out a low cry before she was kissed speechless by John Hauser. His body had been drenched in cold water for so long, but not only did his temperature not drop, it became even hotter and hotter than before. He was sitting on the ground, so Shi Mingwan maintained a rather uncomfortable posture. She felt very uncomfortable and wanted him to let go of her. But how could John Hauser let her go? He easily picked her up and completely imprisoned her in his arms. Shi Mingwan tried to push him, but this time she failed. No matter how hard she struggled, she couldn't escape John Hauser's hands. More importantly, she was at a complete disadvantage at this moment. She was only wearing pajamas, and the thin fabric was easily lifted by John Hauser. He felt that it was troublesome, so he tore her clothes into pieces without any hesitation. Woo-woo. Chapter 654. Shi Mingwan was struggling with life and death. No matter what, she had to fight for a chance for herself. Even if he couldn't escape in the end, John Hauser had completely lost his mind. He still wanted to do something to her. She also wanted an experience that was relatively more respectful to her. It wasn't that he didn't feel conflicted. But now he could only accept his fate. She was the one who brought him back. She was the one who gave him this chance. If she was destined to be unable to escape tonight, then she hoped that her first time would be in bed, not here in a situation like this. John Hauser was still kissing her neck, but when he heard her words he paused. In the next second she was easily picked up by him. He walked very quickly as if he was in a hurry. She was tightly held in his arms, her body pressed against his chest. She looked up at him. His gaze was slightly different from before. There were a few more flickering flames inside. Her back touched the bed, followed by his rather heavy weight for her. She didn't close her eyes. Instead, she looked at John Hauser's eagerness and domineering actions. Her heart trembled. Big brother. John Hauser became even more eager to plunder the girl's body. The corner of her lips started to feel numb and painful from his kiss. She reached out her hand to support his face and looked at him attentively. This face overlapped with that of Big Brother when he was a teenager. They had the same eyebrows and the same eyes, but the person in front of him had lost the youthfulness of his youth, and was now more stable and mature. However, there was one thing that didn't change. His eyes were always sharp, like a lone wolf on the grassland. This face, these eyebrows, these eyes. She had thought about it countless times in her dreams. This was her big brother. He was the big brother who had been with her for more than a year. Shi Mingwan's eyes were burning. Big brother, please be gentle. At this moment, she didn't want to care about Zhang Hao's identity. She didn't want to care about the woman beside him. She didn't want to care about the humiliation he had suffered. The face in front of her overlapped with that of her big brother from back then. Zhang Hao was big brother and big brother was Zhang Hao. From the first time she saw him, she was sure of this. Big brother Wanwan, please be gentler. She spoke very softly. She couldn't even guarantee that the other party would listen. But she had to say it. This was her first time, and the man on top of her was the big brother that she had been longing for so long. She had never wanted to be with another man in her life. If she was destined to have a man, she wanted her first time to be with her big brother. His lips were sealed once more, but this time, it was less urgent than before. There was a hint of gentleness in his tone. The man was trying his best to control himself. Ling Shui's move was extremely ruthless. There was no way he could resist the effects of alcohol and drugs. Perhaps there was a trace of clarity, but that trace of clarity disappeared when Shi Mingwan called him, dear brother. The woman's eyes were like silk and her body was soft. Her eyes were filled with gentleness. The flames that he had been restraining and suppressing just now were now completely ignited. Everything that happened after that was out of their control. Shi Mingwan's reality and memories were mixed together. Zhang Hao and her dear brother had become one person. It was as if she had returned to the time when she was 12 years old. That arrogant and cold youth, but he treated her differently. Their skin was close and their breaths were in harmony. She was like a cloud floating up, down and up with the wind. She floated beyond the clouds of the ninth heaven, unable to find a place to return to. However, she was also like a ship that had been floating on the sea. Now she had found a place to return to. Dear brother. Dear brother. The moment she experienced the pain, she almost wanted to cry. She hugged him tightly and felt what he gave her. The man's breathing became even heavier. She was broken into pieces and was no longer complete. However, he filled her up and finally returned to being complete. Back and forth it kept repeating. This night was exceptionally long. Shi Mingwan didn't sleep for long. She was a person who couldn't sleep easily when she had something on her mind. At dawn she opened her eyes. Looking at the sky that was about to brighten, she turned over. Her body was extremely uncomfortable and uncomfortable. It was as if her entire body had been disassembled. She followed the hand that was tightly wrapped around her waist and raised her eyes to look at the owner of the hand. Zhang Hao had fallen asleep. His eyes were tightly closed. It seemed to be because of the intense exercise, but it also seemed to be because of the alcohol last night. His breathing was steady and long, and his chest rose and fell slightly. His face was no longer as red as it was yesterday. When he fell asleep, he didn't have the sinister aura that he had when he was awake. He looked completely harmless. She wanted to raise her hand and touch his face. Just such a simple action made her feel difficult. She wanted to sleep but she couldn't. She felt tired when she got up. Seeing that the sky outside was getting brighter, Shi Mingwan finally decided to continue sleeping for a while. She turned around. Zhang Hao's hand was still wrapped around her waist. Because of her movements, the blanket slid to her waist. Because of this, Shi Mingwan also saw a scar on his left arm. That scar looked like it had been a long time ago, and the color was already very faint. His skin color was slightly pale. Therefore this scar looked especially obvious. Yesterday Shi Mingwan didn't have time to think, nor did she have time to seriously look at Zhang Hao's body. The sky was getting brighter and the scar was getting clearer and clearer. It was about 5 centimeters long. Shi Mingwan raised her hand and gently caressed the spot. Her eyes suddenly felt a little sore. She had always believed that Zhang Hao was her dear brother. Now this injury had completely confirmed her guess. Dear brother. When Shi Mingwan woke up in the morning, the young man was still sleeping. He had fought yesterday and suffered some injuries. Although they were all superficial wounds, his age also consumed a lot of vitality. Looking at the young man lying motionless on the bed, Shi Mingwan thought about the dozens of yuan she had given him yesterday. That money wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. She regretted coming out for a day. She just wanted to go back to her home now. But there was a problem now. Without money, how was she going to go home? Shi Mingwan was already 12 years old. She thought about it and decided to go straight to the police station and find a police officer to send her home. Before she left, she was a little hesitant. Should she tell Zhang Hao? However, she wasn't familiar with him. It was just that she stayed here for a day yesterday. She said that she was borrowing him, but she even gave him money. Shi Mingwan didn't feel guilty at all when she thought about it. She took a look at the small house and finally left. Shi Mingwan had a good idea. She just needed to find the nearest police station. However, after she came out of the young man's house, she found that she was lost. The bungalows in this area were almost the same, and the alleys were connected in all directions. Every door looked almost the same to her. Shi Mingwan went around for a long time, but not only did she not get out, she even got lost. Just as Shi Mingwan was about to find a public phone to stop and call the police, a voice suddenly rang out. She actually met the two people who had been following her yesterday. Two hooligans stood in front of Shi Mingwan. One was wearing a flowery shirt, and the other was wearing a black shirt. The man in the black shirt took a step forward and glanced at Shi Mingwan's face. Yo, isn't this the little beauty from yesterday? The two of them had their eyes on Shi Mingwan yesterday. Such a young girl with good looks looked like she was alone and didn't have any family by her side. If they sold her, they would make a lot of money. Little beauty, since we met, it's fate. Come with your brothers. Shi Mingwan panicked when she saw these two people. She was lucky to escape yesterday, but it didn't mean that she would be so lucky today. Looking left and right, she ran back like she was flying. The two hooligans looked at each other and quickly followed behind her. Shi Mingwan wasn't familiar with this area, and she was being chased in a hurry. In her panic, she actually ran into a dead end. Little beauty, you can't run anymore, right? The man in the black shirt looked at Shi Mingwan, and the smile on his face became more and more vulgar. Don't run anymore. Follow your brother. Get lost. Shi Mingwan was anxious. She looked at the two people, then looked at the dead end in front of her and fell into great despair. Seeing that the two hooligans were about to approach, she looked around in panic. Finally, she picked up a stone on the ground and held it in her hand, looking like she wanted to fight the two hooligans to the death. Little girl, you have character. Your brother likes you. The man in the flowery shirt glanced at the man in the black shirt, and the two of them moved forward together. Shi Mingwan waved the stone in her hand randomly. However, before she could hit the two of them, her hand was already grabbed by the two hooligans. Little beauty, let's go. Help. Help. Shi Mingwan cried out. Seeing this, the man in the flowery shirt covered Shi Mingwan's mouth. Woo-woo. Shi Mingwan was anxious. Regret once again occupied her heart. She shouldn't have run away from home. The two hooligans dragged her out and were about to run out when the figure of a youth suddenly appeared in front of them. When Shi Mingwan saw the person, her eyes widened. Was him? That dear brother? The youth stood at the entrance of the alley. His gaze swept across the two hooligans, then he looked at Shi Mingwan. His eyes seemed to be filled with displeasure. Brat, don't be a busybody. The man in the flowery shirt glared at the youth and was quite rude. The youth stood there without moving or speaking. The two hooligans didn't take him seriously either. Especially when they saw the injuries on the youth's face, not only on his face but also on his arms. They didn't take the youth seriously even more. When they passed by the youth with Shi Mingwan in tow, the youth didn't move. Shi Mingwan's mouth was blocked. She could only watch as the youth kept making whimpering sounds. The two hooligans didn't take the youth seriously and passed by him just like that. Unexpectedly, when they walked behind the youth suddenly turned around. He flew up and kicked the back of the man in the flowery shirt. The man in the flowery shirt was originally covering Shi Mingwan's mouth, but this sudden kick caught him off guard. The man in the flowery shirt was caught off guard. He let go of Shi Mingwan and his body fell forward. Without waiting for the man in the flowery shirt to get up, the youth kicked the man in the black shirt again. The man in the black shirt was on guard after the man in the flowery shirt fell. The youth didn't succeed. He wasn't annoyed. He waved his hand at the man in the black shirt and punched him. His fists were hurried, quick and ruthless. The man in the black shirt wasn't prepared for this and was hit head-on. Brat, you're courting death. The man in the black shirt rushed towards the youth. At the same time, the youth pulled Shi Mingwan away and faced the two hooligans. Shi Mingwan didn't know the youth's name. She watched the youth fight 1 against 2 and thought of the scene where he was surrounded and beaten up by a group of people yesterday. Be careful. After she shouted, she remembered that she didn't seem to know the youth's name. Seeing that the man in the flowery shirt also stood up and rushed towards the youth, she panicked. Dear brother, be careful. The word dear brother made the youth look at her. Before the man in the flowery shirt's fist swept over, he quickly threw a punch at the other party. The young man's martial arts were all developed through punches and kicks in actual combat. The two hooligans couldn't take advantage of him for a moment. The man in the black shirt was anxious. When the man in the flowery shirt was holding the youth back, he took out a knife from his pocket. However, he didn't point it at the youth but at Shi Mengwan. Shi Mengwan was stunned. She didn't expect such a sudden turn of events. Before she could react, the youth saw the man in the black shirt's actions and pounced in Shi Mengwan's direction. He hugged her tightly and tried to dodge the knife from the man in the black shirt. However, his arm was still stabbed by the man in the black shirt. Blood gushed out. The bright red blood stimulated the youth. There was still a knife in his arm, but it was as if he didn't care about his life. He pulled out the knife and rushed towards the two hooligans. Such a reckless move scared the two hooligans. The two of them actually fled in panic and didn't continue to tangle with him. "Dear brother, are you okay?" Shi Mengwan went forward and looked at the youth's bleeding arm. "What should we do? You're bleeding a lot." "Shut up." The youth glared at her and casually tore off his shirt and wrapped it around his arm. You have to go to the doctor like this." "Dear brother, I'll send you to the doctor." "Go to the doctor?" The youth turned around and looked at Shi Mengwan. There seemed to be a hint of mockery on his face. "Do you have money on you?" Shi Mengwan bit her lip and was speechless for a moment. However, the youth just covered his bleeding arm and walked forward. Shi Mengwan didn't want to go home anymore. The other party had saved her, so she followed behind him worriedly. The young man turned into another alley, and there was an extremely small clinic there. The youth entered the door. There was a middle-aged man wearing a white coat inside. When he saw the youth enter and looked at the injuries on the youth's body, his expression immediately turned ugly. "Why did you fight again? Do you want to die?" The youth didn't say anything. He just pulled open the wound and showed it to the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man stood up and looked at the youth's injury. "It's a little serious. Although it didn't hurt the bones, it still needs stitches. But I don't have any anesthesia here. If you don't have it, then you don't have it." "Cut the crap." Okay. You're quite capable." The middle-aged man was angry. After the youth sat down, he didn't give him any anesthesia and directly treated the youth's wound. When he was cleaning the wound, the youth's expression began to turn rather ugly. When the needle that was about to be stitched into the youth's flesh, the youth's entire body began to tremble. "Dear brother?" Shi Mengwan wasn't an idiot. She had read The Romance of the Three Kingdoms and heard that Guangong scraped bones to treat wounds. However, the person in front of her wasn't Guangong. He was just a youth who looked 15 or 16 years old. "Dear brother? Are you okay?" She couldn't help but glare at the doctor. You gave him anesthesia." "Little girl, don't disturb me. Otherwise I can't guarantee that the stitches will go smoothly." The middle-aged man didn't even raise his head. He just focused on stitching the wound. "Don't worry, a few stitches will be enough. You won't die." "But?" Shi Mengwan looked at the youth worriedly. His fists were clenched tightly and large drops of sweat fell from his face. Shi Mengwan couldn't help but hold his wrist. He was injured because of her, and it was also because of her that he became like this. "Dear brother," the doctor stitched the wound and was still in the mood to joke. "Kid, when did you get to know a girl? She doesn't look like you." "Shut up." The youth's voice was really unpleasant to hear at this moment. He glared coldly at the middle-aged man, then looked at Shi Mengwan. She held his wrist, looking as if it was more painful than him. Inexplicably, he felt that the wound on his arm didn't seem to hurt so much anymore. The wound was finally stitched up and treated. The middle-aged man retracted his hand and looked at the youth's face. "All right, I won't say much. You've always had your own ideas. But I still have to remind you that your wound hasn't come into contact with water these few days, and you haven't carried heavy objects. Most importantly, for the sake of your life, you'd better not fight with others anymore. Got it? You're so long-winded." The youth stood up and moved his arm. Indeed, his bones weren't injured. It was just a flesh wound. He didn't care, nor did he thank him. He directly left the small clinic. "Dear brother?" Shi Mengwan quickly followed behind the youth. The youth's footsteps weren't fast, so she easily caught up to him. "Thank you for today, thank you." "You're welcome. We're just even." The youth glanced at Shi Mengwan. Although Shi Mengwan was young, she understood what he meant at this moment. She helped the youth yesterday and he helped her today. However, Shi Mengwan felt that this was different. If it weren't for the youth today, she would have been taken away by those two hooligans. She really didn't dare to think about what kind of fate she would have had. "We're not even. Dear brother, you saved me. Thank you." She said it very sincerely, but the youth completely ignored her. He walked straight to his home. Shi Mengwan followed behind him. At this moment, she wasn't in the mood to think about going home. Instead, she was thinking about the doctor's words. The wound couldn't touch water, nor could it carry heavy objects. Dear brother was only one person and he saved her. She couldn't be ungrateful. Even if she wanted to go home, she would think about it in a few days. With this thought in mind, Shi Mengwan followed behind the youth. Dear brother, what's your name? Dear brother, you were really amazing just now. Dear brother, that doctor is too bad. He actually didn't give you anesthesia. Dear brother, does your wound still hurt? Dear brother, what's your surname? Dear brother, my name is Shi Mengwan. You can call me Wan Wan. That's what my mother calls me. Dear brother, shut up. The youth, who had been followed and questioned all the way, stopped and glared at Shi Mengwan. If you keep making noise, I'll beat you up. As he spoke, he raised his hand as if he really wanted to hit her. Shi Mengwan stood still. Her eyes were clear and pure. She believed him without a trace of fear. The youth felt defeated. He glanced at Shi Mengwan, turned around and continued walking forward. Dear brother? After entering the door, Shi Mengwan wanted to speak, but the youth suddenly stopped and stood in front of her. He was much taller than her. He stared at her face with a fierce gaze. Listen, you can stay, but you have to follow my rules. What rules? It wasn't like she wanted to stay. She just wanted to take care of him for a few days until his wound healed. The rule is to shut up. When I don't let you speak, you're not allowed to speak. Big? Also, you're not allowed to call me dear brother. But, my name is Qiao Zhe. You can call me Aze. Qiao Zhe's voice sounded very fierce. Shi Mengwan bit her lip and looked at his eyes. She said timidly, but I think dear brother sounds better. Qiao Zhe glared at Shi Mengwan. His uninjured right hand clenched into a fist again. Shi Mengwan's gaze was too calm. He raised his hand and put it down again. Okay, since you call me dear brother, then go wash my clothes. Shi Mengwan didn't expect Qiao Zhe to really let her stay. She nodded. Okay, I'll help you wash your clothes. Anyway, when she was at home, she helped her family wash their clothes. She didn't think that this was a difficult situation. Instead, she felt that this was an opportunity to repay Qiao Zhe for saving her life. Qiao Zhe watched as Shi Mengwan walked into the bathroom in a few steps. When she really went to wash his clothes, his gaze became a little complicated. Just like that, Shi Mengwan stayed at Qiao Zhe's house. Shi Mengwan caressed the scar on Zhan Hao's arm. This scar was left behind to save her. Seeing this, she no longer had to doubt, nor did she have to look for it. Zhan Hao was dear brother and dear brother was Zhan Hao. But why didn't Zhan Hao remember her at all? Could it be that she was the only one who held on to that memory of the past, but dear brother had completely forgotten about it? The hand that was originally pressing on Zhan Hao's scar was grabbed by someone. The person who was originally asleep had woken up at some point in time. At this moment, he was staring at her with his eyes open. Because he had just woken up, Zhan Hao's gaze was calm at this moment. His eyes were deep, but there was no trace of hostility. Shi Mengwan could even see a faint sense of peace in his gaze. Their eyes met and there was silence. Shi Mengwan looked at him and was the first to look away. You're awake. After asking a useless question, Shi Mengwan lowered her eyes uncomfortably. It was one thing to be prepared yesterday, but it was another to have sex. In the end, she was still a little shy. She didn't even dare to look into his eyes. Zhan Hao didn't say anything, but she couldn't help but say, dear brother? When these three words came out, Zhan Hao's expression changed slightly. Shi Mengwan lowered her head, but she didn't notice the change in his expression at all. Dear brother, are you all right now? His appearance yesterday made her a little worried. She cared about him so much that she even forgot the discomfort on her body. Dear brother, how are you now? More than 10 years of concern, more than 10 years of searching. Shi Mengwan, who had never given up and never gave up. Not getting a response from Zhan Hao, she couldn't help but look up at him. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.